Chapter 673. Jumping into the water and swimming out would bring him to the depths of the ocean. While he was hesitating, he heard the sound of water splashing. Vic actually jumped into the water, his beautiful fishtail drew a circle in the air and disappeared into the water. Wei Bai squatted alone in the cave. Tongzi, he left me here and ran away by himself. The system said, there's no other way. Now that the mermaid is in heat, he's basically irrational and only wants to have sex. But since you're not in heat, he thought you rejected him, so he went to find his little love fish. You've been eliminated by him. The habit of mermaids was to have sex more than their appetite. Once they were in heat, their minds would not be clear. They would look for the nearest female mermaid to mate. Because of animal instinct, during mating, the male mermaid would protect the female. If the female was not in heat, they would not mate. At that time, the mermaid would give up and look for other mermaids. Wei Bai said, after he's in heat, will he remember that I'm still here? The system was silent for a moment. No way, after he's in heat, he'll give birth to little mermaids. It's just a mere 20 points of affinity. He'll have long forgotten about the old, fleshy, and disgusting dumb human. After mating, the mermaid would not leave the female's side. Because the female could be pregnant, they had to protect her. Wei Bai hugged the tattered clothes, shivering in the cold and started crying. It's so lonely and cold. Is this my burial place? I raised that stupid fish for nothing. How could he treat his old mother like this? The system, old mother. Wei Bai covered his face and said sadly, he doesn't want his wife. I gave birth to him and raised him, but he ran away with another fish. What a waste of my 20 years of hard work. The system, what's 20 years, isn't it just a few days? Wei Bai said, Tongzi, my eldest son. The system said, stop your grandpa. Who's your eldest son? I'm your ancestor. This drama queen is not done yet. Is she? After the system stopped, Wei Bai's expression changed, and he stared coldly at the water. In the cave, the atmosphere was as strange as the scene of a horror movie. The system shuddered. It would have been better for her to call him son. Wei Bai thought for a while before she mustered up the courage to go into the water and see if she could swim out. His feet had just touched the cold water. The surface of the water rippled, and a black figure emerged from the water. Golden hair fluttered in the dark and cold water. Vic emerged from the water at once. He blinked his eyes, and the golden light in his eyes was resplendent. Water droplets rolled down from his beautiful muscles on his muscular body, as if a mythical sea god had suddenly appeared. He turned his head and looked at Wei Bai. Her expressionless face was flushed with heat and excitement. He swam to the side of the rock, stretched out his hands, and carefully held a pile of beautiful shells and rare corals. Put it on the stone. There were also some human jewels in this pair of colorful objects. He was very uncomfortable and wanted to mate, but the female mermaid he liked was not in heat. He didn't know what to do. He had no choice but to follow the merfolk's habit of pleasing their mates and look for things that the female liked to please her. Wei Bai squatted by the water and stared blankly at the pile of shells. So why did this mentally retarded fish find so many shells? Could they be eaten? Vic put his hand on the stone and rested his head on it. His beautiful face was full of unbearable desire. He swung his fishtail, the golden blue tail, lustrous and incredibly beautiful. Wei Bai looked at him indifferently. Finally, she tried to reach out, but instead of taking the shell, she gently touched his hair. Chapter 674. Wake, bear with it, wait until the estrus is over, then you'll be fine. She had just communicated with the system. Merfolk's first estrus period was the shortest. It would pass in 2 or 3 hours. And the venom of the bullet in his body had begun to fade. Wake's body was stronger than any other merfolk, so the bullet venom was effective against ordinary merfolk. He only needed a few hours of digestion to solve it. As for what Chinamo said, he had to eat human flesh. It also referred to ordinary merfolk. Wake thought she agreed. His tail wagged more cheerfully, his head raised so that she could touch his head more easily. His hair was long and beautiful, other merfolk definitely couldn't compare to him. Wake sniffed the scent on her body. The soft fragrance stimulated him so much that his eyes were about to stand up. But there was no smell of estrus. Wake's ferocious temper appeared again, his teeth were about to show. Why wasn't she an estrus? Wasn't he beautiful? Wasn't he strong? Or was the smell of his estrus not good enough? Because she was soaked in seawater, Wei Bai, whose nose was blocked and headache, couldn't smell the scent of the merfolk in estrus at all. It was like the ocean, deep but with a hot breath different from the ocean. It was as seductive as the merfolk's song. It could make both humans and merfolk lose control. Wake thought about finding other merfolk. He even remembered that his song could attract the best female merfolk in the deepest part of the ocean. But he didn't know why. After he went out, he couldn't help but swim back. He liked her smell, even if she wasn't in estrus. Her skin was wrinkled and didn't look young. But he just liked it. He wanted her, not other merfolk. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 25. Wei Bai had question marks on her head. Losing his mind could also increase favorability. Wake was getting more and more uncomfortable, his fingers pressed on the stone, and the stone cracked. He suddenly roared at Wei Bai, his teeth had a terrible deterrent force. Merfolk who only had instincts were very scary. They could tear humans apart if they weren't careful. Wei Bai didn't dare to move. She had no experience in dealing with mermaids who had lost their minds. To be precise, he had no experience in dealing with bestiality. Therefore, he could only take one step at a time. Wake could not hold on any longer, his body started to tremble, the gold color in his eyes was so dense that it was terrifying. Estrus to this point was a form of torture for the merfolk. They could mate even if they weren't in heat. She just couldn't give birth to a little mermaid. This memory flashed through Wake's mind, and his eyes became terrifying. He wanted to climb out of the water and capture her. When Wei Bai saw his actions, she felt as if a terrifying crocodile had crawled out of the water to eat people. She cursed the system thousands of times in her mind. Her routine was completely useless here. What was the fish doing? Their brains were different from humans, and their past experience was completely useless. Wake seemed to feel her fear. He hesitated for a moment before he struggled to suppress his uncomfortable desire. Then, he used his limited brain to think before deciding to return to the water. If there were little mermaids, then this little female could only follow him. He liked her taste, so he had to snatch the position of her partner first. Merfolk also had a way of courtship, which could only be done to the partner they had recognized. It was different from those one-night stands. This kind of courtship was equivalent to a marriage proposal. He was hesitant at first, but she wasn't in heat, so he was anxious. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 675. Wake's face flashed with anger, embarrassment, and suppressed discomfort. Suddenly, he looked up, and a trace of vigilance flashed in his eyes. But he saw Wei Bai trying to bypass the stones and come in front of him. She squatted down, looking a little embarrassed. Her eyes were loving and gentle as she reached out and put her hand to his lips. Drink some blood to detoxify. The venom in his body would take some time to detoxify. Wei Bai was afraid that he would be lured into estrus by the venom again, and there would be no end to it. A mermaid's second estrus was not something that could be completed in 2 hours, it was at least a day. Wake raised his cold eyes, full of focused scrutiny. Bai Weiwei didn't have a guilty conscience. Instead, she calmly looked at him. Mermaids naturally did not trust humans. Even if this human created him. Who made mermaids and humans fight for so many years? Wake couldn't find any trace of malice or purpose in her eyes. He turned his head, his body lost strength, and could only lie down powerlessly. His eyes were gloomy, and even his fishtail had lost its beautiful luster. He looked like he was seriously ill. Weiwei Bai was still trying to persuade him, "Wake, drink some, I'm worried about you." Wake's heart flashed with a few traces of malice. This woman kept saying that he was her dream. How far could she go for her dream? No matter how pure human beings were, their nature was vicious and selfish. There was no reason why only she could be good. He looked up, grinding his teeth, and his eyes flashed with a cold fierceness as he bit her wrist. Fresh blood poured into his lips and teeth. It made his body begin to recover its strength, and this feeling was terrible. Weiwei Bai's body trembled, purely out of fear. How could there be a sudden attack? Then there was pain, but this kind of pain for her. Compared to the severe pain that could easily kill her, it was at most kindergarten level. So she just frowned slightly, looking at him with a pale face, her eyes calm and gentle. Obviously, the blood was delicious, and his bloodthirsty impulse made him grab more. But when his teeth bit into her fragile wrist, his strength softened and he didn't dare to bite deeper. Her blood was sweet in his mouth, but his heart was bitter. Wake saw that she still had a smile on her face. It was as if she was willing to suck his blood like this. Perhaps it was because of the blood, but her cold heart warmed up. He suddenly loosened his teeth. Seeing that her wrist was full of blood, he couldn't help but lower his head to lick it. The wound slowly healed. Weiwei Bai said, "Is it enough?" Wake bit his lips and heavily kissed her healed wrist. Then, his white and strong body dove into the water. She had golden hair and a beautiful fishtail that was faintly discernible in the water. He disappeared into the water. It seemed that she didn't want to face Weiwei Bai. Then, Weiwei Bai heard the system's notification. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 40. Mermaids did not trust humans. But once you start to trust, your feelings will become purer. Naturally, the favorability will increase easily. Weiwei Bai squatted by the water and looked at the water silently. Finally, she couldn't help but say, "Do you think I can catch fish?" System, what for? Weiwei Bai, I'm hungry. After tossing and turning for so long, not only was her head dizzy, she was also hungry. And she was also losing blood. And that stupid fish would disappear at every turn, even if the favorability increased. In her eyes, he was still retarded. Weiwei Bai couldn't catch fish and felt tired, so she leaned against the rock and fell asleep. Chapter 676. Rick, who was hiding in the water, dared to slowly come out. His cold and exquisite face revealed a helpless expression. He had just hidden himself like a coward, running away without a fight. But seeing her looking at him so gently, his heart was beating so fast that he had to hide in the water for fear that she would hear him. Wake approached her gently and couldn't help but reach out to touch her. Maybe humans also had some good ones. She was one. His fingers touched her face, and the soft and smooth feeling made him close his eyes comfortably. He lay on the side and looked at her. Even he didn't know how gentle his eyes were. When Weiwei Bai woke up, she found herself sleeping in an enveloped sleeping bag, and the sound of a bonfire burning came from beside her. The cave was still the same cave. She opened her eyes in a daze and saw her wet clothes hanging by the bonfire. She was wearing a silk dress. When she woke up, everything was complete. Weiwei Bai, Tongzi, did you do this? The system was eating instant noodles. When it heard the host's voice, it quickly hid the instant noodles behind it. I didn't, really. Way by, after the system finished speaking, it realized that the host didn't find out that it was secretly eating. It was just about to change the topic. There was the sound of breaking water again. Wake walked out of the water, his upper body bare, wearing a pair of trousers, and walked out of the water in the appearance of a human. You're awake. His tone was still not very standard, but it was much more familiar than before. Wei Bai half sat up and looked at him in confusion. Wake? Wake put the thing hanging in his hand by the bonfire, then he took out the canned fish from it and easily cut it open with his fingernails. He was going to give it to Wei Bai to eat. But did she like fish? Mermaids liked it. Humans didn't necessarily like it. Wake silently chose another can, and after cutting it open, he remembered that humans ate hot. He remembered the books he had read and followed suit, putting the can on the bonfire to roast. With his back to Wei Bai, he looked like an adult man. Except for his long blonde hair, he didn't look like a mermaid at all. He had taken these things from the human ships when he surfaced from the sea. Humans were different from mermaids. Their customs, diets, and interests were all different. He didn't know what she liked, but he instinctively looked for human things to give her. Wei Bai said, "Vic, are you okay?" When Wake heard her voice, his body went numb, as if he had been electrocuted. His body tensed up uncomfortably. After a long time, he finally said, "Yes." Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. "That's good." Hearing her sincere words, Wake's body stiffened even more. When he saw her now, he felt awkward all over. He wanted to get close to her, but he also wanted to avoid her. This dilemma left him at a loss. The merfolk were the best warriors, and there was no hesitation at all. He looked like a useless human being, bashful and stupid. Wake's eyes darkened as he lowered his head uncomfortably. "In the future, you." Wei Bai, ? The system freely translated, "In the future, you are mine." Wei Bai, oh. Wake said laboriously, "You like the sea." The system translated, "Do you like the sea?" Wei Bai, who hadn't thought much about it, nodded. "I like it." A trace of ecstasy flashed in Wake's eyes. He pursed his lips and pressed down the smile on his lips. As a male merfolk, he had to be calm and collected. Wake's tone lightened. I don't dislike you because you are a human. The sea is different from the land. I will try my best to give you a good living environment. Chapter 677. This sentence was too long, and he said it with difficulty and vagueness. As expected, Wei Bai was at a loss. What language was this? The system calmly translated for the second time, "I don't mind that you are an old, ugly, useless, and disgusting human. The sea is different from the ugly and dirty land you live on. It is your honor to live in the sea. Kneel down and accept the decree, old woman." Wei Bai, MMP, is there really no problem with this translation? Why do I feel that the translated sentence is much longer? Wake turned his back, not daring to look back. He said with a cold face and a dry tone, the mermaid dance, you saw the king's courtship mermaid dance. No other mermaid dares to want you, only I want you. I will take responsibility." This sentence was indeed too long. Wei Bai's eyes went blank. What the hell is this talking about? The system translated, "You peeked at my body when I wasn't paying attention." Wei Bai, shut up. She didn't want to listen to the translation. The translation didn't have a single good word. She tried to calm down the anger in her body, and then showed a strategy, a standard warm smile. Her voice was sweet and light. Well, whatever Wake says. The strategy was to follow whatever he said. It was fine even if she didn't understand. It was fine as long as the favorability increased. Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth and thought that sooner or later, she would steam this fish. How was she old? She was in the prime of her life. Wake suddenly turned his head. He thought that she would hesitate, even for a second. But she didn't even hesitate. His eyes were still burning with the light of the bonfire, and the indifference on his face couldn't help but distort. He reached out and grabbed her arm. His ice blue eyes stared at her. He emphasized each word and said, "You are my partner." This sentence, maybe because he said it slowly, was particularly heavy and depressing. And it was very smooth. Wei Wei Bai finally understood the sentence. Wait, partner. Did I miss something in the middle? How did it become a partner? Wake's eyes were burning as he waited for her response. Wei Wei Bai had no reason to refuse, so she nodded. She was already a slave, so she didn't need the title of companion. And the partner that the mermaid was talking about might be a partner. When Wake saw her nod, his mind went blank for a moment. He thought that it was only because he had danced the courtship dance that he had to give her an explanation. But the moment she nodded, his brain seemed to explode with fireworks. It was like a hurricane or a tsunami. His calmness was easily shattered. Wake held her hand tightly. His lips and tongue were stuck together and he couldn't speak. His muscles were so nervous that they kept trembling. In hindsight, he realized that he was ecstatic. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 50. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but say to the system, this favorability increase is a bit fast. With just a few sentences, the favorable impression points exploded into the sky as if they had eaten explosives. The main mission of the previous dimension was too easy to complete. In the end, he received a crazy side quest. As a result, Wei Wei Bai now had a psychological shadow. System, anyway, whether it's fast or not, you can't reject the side quest, so it doesn't make a difference. Wei Wei Bai thought about it. Indeed, it was a despairing realization. Wake's blue eyes turned to gold because of excitement. His cold thin lips moved again. This time it was authentic mermaid language. It was ethereal with a deep hoarseness. As if he was chanting, he said, "You can't betray me, or you will suffer the backlash of the ocean. You can't leave me, or you will be buried in the depths of the ocean forever. You can't go back on your promise to form a contract with me, or I will forever lock you in the abyss 30,000 meters below, so that you will never see the light of the sun." This was the curse from the Mermaid King. Wake looked at her ignorant soft eyes. Her eyes were clear and pure as she looked at him without any defense against him. She didn't know that he was cursing her. The curse from the Mermaid King would accompany her forever. Once she tried to leave, she would be cursed and stay in the ocean forever. / comma. Chapter 678. Wei Wei Bai heard him say a lot of things and couldn't help but knock on the translation machine. The translation machine was simple and neat. Don't try to run, or I'll break your legs. Wei Wei Bai, isn't this translation too short? And she couldn't run now even if she wanted to. This cave in the sea, without the guidance of a mermaid, she couldn't get out at all. Wake saw her pursing her bright red lips, her eyelashes covering her eyes, casting a shadow under her eyes, as if she was thinking about something. Although she didn't know the curse and didn't understand the language of mermaids. But Wake still felt guilty. Because the curse was a terrible thing, no one would use it on someone close to them. His ice blue eyes, like the sea surface blown by a breeze, floated a few glimmers. Maybe it was to reduce this sense of guilt. He reached out, passed through her long hair, and held her face. Then he lowered his head, his eyes dark with gold, and whispered a few words on her white neck. These were the words to remove the slave mark. Then he gently swept over her like a feather and kissed her slave mark. The mark slowly faded. Wei Bai didn't dare to move, thinking of Wake's sharp teeth, for fear that he would bite off her neck if he used force. Wake made sure that the mark was gone, and then showed a relieved smile. Then he let go of her and handed the warm food to Wei Bai. Wei Bai was so hungry that she was about to faint. She ate whatever Wake gave her. It didn't matter if it was a little burnt. Wake watched her eat in small bites, and a doting smile flashed in his eyes. The system felt like it saw the daily life of a cat and a poop picker. As the one being fed, its host had no sense of shame at all and ate very happily. So the system also learned from the host's thick skin, secretly took out the half-barrel of instant noodles that it had hidden, and carefully ate. Don't make a sound, so as not to be heard. After eating, it was time to rest. As a male mermaid, because he had a partner, his instinctive genes were stimulated. For example, protecting their mate, giving their mate the best cave, and giving her the most beautiful shells and corals were the most basic things that a male should do. Although Vic was a mermaid who came out of a culture tank, he had never seen how a mermaid treated his female in reality. But the memories gave him a lot of guidance. Including the marriage ceremony, they had to go to a special location, find the mermaid sorcerer, and complete the marriage ceremony. Only then could they mark each other as partners. This was different from humans. Human marriage certificates were held together by a weak sense of trust and morality. As for the merfolk's marriage mark, it would accompany them for a lifetime, in life and death. If one side betrayed the other side could punish them. Vic couldn't wait to mark her with his mate's mark. Wei Bai was tidying up her clothes. She felt that she would not stay in this place for too long. He would definitely get rheumatism if he stayed in such a humid place for too long. Suddenly, she heard the sound of water splashing. She looked up and saw that Vic had turned back into a merman. His tall and slender body was submerged in the water. His beautiful blue eyes were looking at her deeply. "I will, come back." He stammered this sentence, barely speaking smoothly. Wei Bai nodded with a smile, "I'll wait for you." Vic's throat moved, his expression was indescribably happy. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. Wei Bai shivered, this was abnormal. The favorability was rising so fast, she felt like she was going to be struck by lightning in the next second. Vic disappeared in the water. Slash. Chapter 679. Wei Bai asked the system in fear, "I must have miscalculated. The speed of the increase in favorability is not normal. It's different from the previous increases in favorability. In the past, if there were no major changes, favorability would not fluctuate so easily." The system said, "I didn't miscalculate." It flipped through its database and also felt that the favorability was increasing too quickly. Originally, it was very difficult to conquer the target of this plane. Mermaids saw humans as mortal enemies. How could it be that easy to increase favorability? As it flipped through, it suddenly saw Yi Yuxuan's folder. The system's mouth twitched. Damn, the effect of the plane barrier on the chosen one was getting weaker and weaker. It looked deeply at the clueless Wei Bai. It hid the folder even deeper. No wonder the favorability was increasing so quickly. It was because the emotional fragments that belonged to Yi Yuxuan seemed to resonate with Yi Yuxuan. This also explained why the dream barrier started to lose its effect on Yi Yuxuan. The system's face was gloomy. There was nothing good in the warehouse that could stop Yi Yuxuan, who was getting stronger. If this went on, one day Yi Yuxuan would explode. It could not control it. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, Tongzi, we've known each other for so long. Just tell me the truth. You're not hiding anything from me, right? She had been suspicious for a long time. The system trembled and almost shook out Yi Yuxuan. Its facial muscles twitched and its voice trembled. Wei Wei Bai was on full alert. She narrowed her eyes coldly. What are you hiding from me? The system finally confessed, I ate 2 bowls of instant noodles. Because there was a discount, I couldn't help but buy one for free. Wei Wei Bai gritted her teeth. How much life points do you have, you wastrel? The system said, 3 days. Wei Wei Bai said, will you die if you don't eat? The system was silent for a while, then said pitifully, yes. The system did need to eat, but it did not dare to eat too much. Before it was bound to Wei Wei Bai, any snack would cost more than 100 life points. Wei Wei Bai, she could not reply. Poverty made us unrecognizable. In the end, Wei Wei Bai sighed, then eat less. You'll be stuck in the door if you're too fat. The system said obediently, okay. The system and Love suddenly showed a fake smile at the same time. Bai Wei Wei, such an obedient lowly slagstem, I feel like there's a trick, oh. System, the host is so easily fooled. Something's not right. After a while, he came out of the sea. He held a pearl clam in his hand and carefully handed it to Bai Wei Wei. Bai Wei Wei took a look curiously. Inside, there was a pearl shining with a rainbow Mary Sue light. Wake picked up the pearl and motioned for Bai Wei Wei to lower her head. Wei Wei Bai did not think much of it. Just as she lowered her head, the pearl was stuffed into her mouth. It rolled down her throat and into her stomach. Wei Wei Bai. I feel like I'm having indigestion. Wei Bai watched her eat and stretched out his strong hands. Come, down. Wei Wei Bai knew that he just meant to leave. Her feet touched the water and she was about to go down. Wake, however, quickly swam to her side and gently held her feet so that she could borrow his strength to lightly fall into the water and directly into his embrace. Wei Wei Bai was held by him. He could not help but put his face close to her hair. Because it was soaked in seawater, there was a damp smell of the sea. This smell was attractive to mermaids. Wei Bai closed his eyes comfortably and then plunged into the water. Wei Wei Bai was ready to choke on the water, but when she entered the water, she found that the cold water was warm. /mobile. Chapter 680. And she could breathe, and even look at the seawater with her eyes open, without any pressure or barrier from the water. Wei Wei Bai blinked. She could clearly touch the water, but she felt as comfortable as if she was on land. The rainbow pearl she ate just now had such an effect. Wake took her and swam out of the cave. In the deep sea, all kinds of fish swarmed over. Above their heads were a group of sharks, but when Wake came, the sharks fled in fear. Wake didn't care about this. He hugged her, his strong body and elegant fishtail broke through the pressure of the sea. He kept swimming deeper and deeper. It was getting darker and darker. The sun gradually left them. Wei Wei Bai, who could vaguely see something, suddenly felt her scalp go numb. A huge underwater abyss appeared. The abyss was terrifyingly dark and bottomless, as if they were going to enter hell. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but hug Wake. It was the first time she knew that she had a phobia of the deep sea. Wake felt her trembling. He lowered his head and saw her closing her eyes tightly, pressing her face against his chest. This feeling of dependence made his eyes darken. He softly sang a few lines of a song. In the cold and dark sea, there were huge white jellyfish emitting light. They appeared in groups. They were like dandelions blooming on the dark land. The beauty was strange and dreamy. He said softly, Wei Wei. This name, when spoken in human language, sounded gentle and smooth. He kept it in his mouth, afraid that this name would melt. Wei Wei Bai opened her eyes and saw the sea full of glowing jellyfish. It was the first time she saw such a beautiful underwater world. The abyss was not so scary. The entire underwater abyss was filled with white jellyfish light. Wake's cold and exquisite face couldn't help but reveal a doting smile. His hand gently stroked her hair, and then he accelerated his swimming speed, plunging into the abyss of the sea. Wei Wei Bai didn't know how long she had been swimming, but a strange underwater world appeared. Countless fish of all shapes and sizes swam in schools. And under the fish, a huge city appeared. Unlike human cities, this city looked colorful and was filled with houses built with different colors of coral reefs. The houses were also round, flat, tall, and all kinds of shapes. Just as Vic was about to swim over, a large group of mermaids of various colors rushed over. The leader looked a little old, with long gray hair and a wrinkled face. When he saw Vic, his face flashed with joy. Then, he immediately lowered his head and stretched out his hands in a gesture of submission. All the mermaids instantly submitted. Wake's expression turned cold. He was like a high and mighty emperor, his words were like orders. Mermaid, prepare the best dark sorcerer, I want to get married. The leader raised his head in shock, then looked at the person in his arms. Human. He said with trembling lips, Your Majesty, this is a human. Wake's thin lips were like a knife, slowly evoking a sharp sneer. He looked at him coldly. The pressure of the Mermaid King made these mere people instinctively tremble. Even if Vic ordered them to die at this moment, they could only follow his orders and commit suicide. All the mermaids began to tremble, not daring to raise their heads to look at him. Vic softly spat out a word, Get lost. All the mermaids turned around and quickly left. Vic then took Wei Wei Bai into the city. Then he put her in a super large pearl clam and said in human language with difficulty, Wait for me. /collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 681. Wei Wei Bai was still in a daze, but he had already turned and left. Less than a minute after he left, her pearl muscle was surrounded by a bunch of mermaids. They looked at Wei Wei Bai with hostility, as if they were looking at a piece of braised pork, as if they wanted to stuff her into their mouths. Wei Wei Bai thought about the fights between humans and mermaids. She hugged her knees, surrounded by mermaids who hated her. She felt like a little cabbage that accidentally entered a lion's den. No matter how she looked at it, it didn't feel right. Wei Wei Bai said, Tongzi, this group of mermaids looks like they want to eat me. Although humans were not in the mermaids' diet, they were not picky when necessary. The system said, they don't look like they want to eat you, but they already plan to eat you. As soon as the system finished speaking, a stunningly beautiful mermaid came in front of Wei Wei Bai. Her clear eyes were filled with frost. She raised her head and snorted coldly. The system calmly translated, Human, get back to where you came from, or I will kill you. Wei Wei Bai said excitedly to the system, Is this a jealous female antagonist online? System, why are you so excited, host? Wei Wei Bai said, How long has it been since I saw a woman go against me? I miss it so much. After so many worlds, she finally saw a woman who came to fight for a man. Wei Wei Bai adjusted her state, she looked up casually, her eyes cold and mocking, the corners of her mouth slightly curved, her delicate face suddenly showing traces of coldness. She reached out her white fingers and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Then she said gently, Yo, your man likes me, what can I do? I am also very desperate. The mermaid could also understand human language. She was stunned. Maybe it was because she had never seen a woman who could say such shameless words. Her eyes were burning with anger, she suddenly said in human language, You are not worthy of our king. Wei Wei Bai smiled and suddenly came down from the pearl clam. She walked in front of the mermaid and raised her beautiful chin with a finger. You don't know, do you? It was your family's king that cried and begged me to be with him. I don't want to either. There are so many men who like me. Why should I be with a fish like him? Shock flashed through the mermaid's eyes. No, impossible. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows. Why? Haven't you seen a woman as popular as me? I don't blame you for being ignorant. System, look at how bitchy she is. The host is the standard evil supporting female lead, come online. The mermaid's eyes turned cold. She raised her fingers in anger, and her sharp nails were about to tear this reckless human into pieces. Wei Wei Bai calculated the timing and fell backwards awkwardly. She fell into the soft pearl mussel unscathed. Then she saw a tall figure appear behind the mermaid. His fingers firmly grasped the mermaid's hand, and his ice blue eyes flashed with anger. Wei Wei Bai saw him and immediately put on a posture of being pushed and bullied. She looked at him weakly. Wake's face turned cold. His cold nails directly cut through the mermaid's wrist, crippling her entire arm. He then threw her aside. System, I feel like I'm watching an old soap opera where the female lead is bullied by the evil supporting female lead. Wei Wei Bai, I haven't seen a man-stealing woman come online for a long time. I'm so excited. I can't control myself when I'm excited. Let's play the role of a white lotus. The system was silent for a while before saying, these days, no one would be fooled. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Of course. It's so old-fashioned. Those who would be fooled would be stupid. The is at https://m sashu. com// the button at the bottom to record your reading record. Chapter 682. It was so obvious that she was pretending to be bullied. How blind would one have to be to think that it was the mermaid's fault? Just as she was thinking this, Wake's cold voice sounded with a bit of hoarseness. When I wasn't here, you bullied my wife like this. You even dared to push her down, execute her. System, fuck, the male lead is actually blind. Even if the Mermaid King was blind, once the order was given, it couldn't be changed. So it was rare for someone to come online to steal a man, so it was just a death sentence? Then he walked in front of Wei Wei Bai and his expression suddenly softened. He reached out to pick her up and walked out. Wei Wei Bai didn't understand the mermaid language and didn't see what happened to the mermaid, so she was carried away by him and left the scene. He held her weak body tightly, his heart beating fiercely. It felt like even his blood was boiling. He heard her words. She was jealous of him and went tit for tat with the other mermaids. Even when he saw her clumsily frame others, the ecstasy in his heart couldn't be suppressed. Even when he heard her say that he was begging for her life or something. He felt very happy. Because she cared about him, she fought for him. To steal the partner they liked, they all fought and framed each other. She liked him. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 60. Wei Wei Bai, the favorability rose so casually, her heart was flustered. Wei Wei Bai was carried into a coral cave, where a black mermaid was waiting. Wake couldn't wait to put her down, then he grabbed her finger, lowered his head and bit it. Beads of blood oozed out. The blood dripped into the black mermaid's palm. Then Wake also dripped his own blood on it. The 2 drops of blood floated up and merged into one, turning into a complex pattern. The black mermaid put the pattern in Wei Wei Bai's hand and it merged into her skin and disappeared. Wake also caught the same pattern. The black mermaid said, "The contract is complete." Wake's deep and delicate eyebrows softened and he showed a stunning smile. A hurried and simple wedding contract ceremony. Before he completed it, he didn't know how flustered his heart was. He was afraid that she would run away. Wei Bai finally had the time to ask the system, "What is this?" The system said, "The marriage contract." Wei Bai, so, she married a fish so casually. Wake's cold and delicate face was filled with the light of happiness because of the gentle smile. He kissed her forehead and said to her in the mermaid's language, "I'll take you to the mermaid's heart to be baptized." This way, she could become a mermaid and be with him forever. Wei Bai couldn't understand what he was saying, but she heard the voice of the side quest. "Ding, please complete the mermaid's heart research project. Steal the mermaid's heart and return to the mainland to study the secrets of the mermaid's heart. Before you complete the side mission, you are not allowed to complete the main mission. Also, you must ensure that your affinity with the main mission does not exceed 65. Side mission failed. Host, please happily appear 10,000 meters under the sea and be crushed into a meat patty without any protective measures." Wei Bai, Wake was very excited and immediately ran to the mermaid's heart with her in his arms. But that place was full of mermaid guards. A noble mermaid had been waiting there for a long time. He was almost lying on the ground. "Your Majesty, humans can't go in. The mermaid's heart is the support point of the ocean. If something happens, we're finished." Wake's footsteps paused, his ice blue eyes were calm and full of coldness. His voice was ethereal and cold. "I believe her, she is my wife." The noble said, "Please, Your Majesty, humans can't be trusted." Wake's eyes softened. "I believe her. If something happens to the mermaid's heart, I will take all the responsibility." After that, he carried Wei Bai into the most important holy place of the mermaids. The place where the mermaid's heart was placed. No human could enter here. Wei Bai was the first one. Address of the full text, https://www.sashu.com. Download address of the collect below to record this reading record. Quick, comma. Chapter 683. Wei Bai was still digesting the information about the mermaid's heart. She didn't understand the mermaid's language at all, and she had never heard of the mermaid's heart. Wake took her hand and walked to a dark blue sea. He looked up and waved his hand casually. A huge shadow appeared above his head. Wei Bai couldn't help but look up. A huge blue whale swam slowly. Wake picked up Wei Bai, swung his fishtail, and swam up to the back of the blue whale. The blue whale sped up and swam through a complicated sea area to the central area. All kinds of strange undersea plants grew. The blue whale cried, and Wake said to Wei Bai, "Wait, for me." Wei Bai stared blankly at the information about the mermaid's heart. Her mind was blank. She just nodded instinctively and showed a perfunctory smile. When Wake jumped down from the blue whale and plunged deeper into the sea, she finally couldn't help but explode at the system. Did this side quest eat arsenic? Is it trying to poison me to death? What was the mermaid's heart? It was the support point of the mermaid empire. If it was taken away, there would be a big earthquake here in minutes. To put it bluntly, it was to calm the sea. Once it was taken away, there would be a big riot. Even if it could be taken away, what was the secret? If there were 10,000 secrets in the mermaid's heart, would she die of old age in the plane? No, it seemed that she didn't need to die of old age. She would die in a few months. Wei Bai's fingers were trembling. She felt that these planes, whether it was the favorability or the side quest, they were all screwed up. Her past experience was useless. The system was silent for a moment before saying, "The side quest will automatically adjust its difficulty. When it feels that it should be difficult, it will be especially difficult." Wei Bai gritted her teeth. When it should be difficult, how difficult is it? There must be a standard. The system's tone was angry. How would I know what the main neurotic system is thinking? If it wants to raise the difficulty level, it can do so. If it doesn't want to raise the difficulty level, it can also let you sing a song to pass. Wei Bai, I think we'll die in the mission sooner or later. What kind of damned mission was this? The system blurted out, you definitely won't die. Wei Bai's eyes narrowed. She felt that there was something wrong with this sentence. Her expression instantly turned cold. 004, do you really have confidence in me? Why was he so sure that she wouldn't die? She wasn't even sure. Even after running around for his life every day, he only managed to earn 100 days worth of HP. Every time she tried, she felt like she was going to die at any moment. She could only hold on, not daring to say that she was tired or afraid. He was afraid that if he stopped, the mission would fail. Failure equaled death. This formula had always been deeply rooted in her heart. No one could always succeed. She was also afraid that she would fail one day. As soon as the words left the system's mouth, it wanted to smash its own mouth. It was extremely nervous, but its tone was calm. You have so little confidence in yourself. You're the host that I chose. And even if this mission fails, you can still return to reality. With 100 days worth of HP, you'll have a chance to continue to transmigrate to the next mission. You definitely won't die. Wei Bai's tone was perplexed. Really? The system emphasized each word. I won't let you die. If you don't believe in yourself, don't you believe in me? Wei Bai's eyes were dead fish. I don't. The system was completely disheartened. It suddenly cried like a fat system that weighed more than 20,000 pounds. It had finally dug out its lungs and heart for its dead host, but now its heart was in pain. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com/. Chapter 685. Wake blinked, his blue eyes were full of confusion. Wei Bai held up the mermaid's heart, bowed her head, and leaned her forehead against the bead. A beautiful blue light enveloped her, and she softly made her wish, please come back to the land with me. Please come back to the land with me. Wake's blue eyes turned gold because of the sudden emotional outburst. His power immediately stirred up the sea. Back to the land, she didn't want him anymore. The mermaid's eyes turned terrifying and desolate. He looked at Wei Bai and roared in human language. Stay. Stay, Wei. Only her name, he could always call out smoothly. Wei Bai wanted to look back, but a white light flashed in front of her eyes, and she and the bead had disappeared on the back of the huge whale. In the cold sea, a powerful force swept up. Those streams of water risked their lives to break through the enormous pressure and continued to rush upwards. They wanted to catch the mermaid's bride. Wake felt the heart-wrenching pain. He stretched out his finger, wanting to leave the eye of the sea directly. But when he walked out, the earthquake in the sea began. Wake's eyes flashed with crazy anger. He looked fiercely at the sea. Wei Bai had already disappeared, only the whale was left. Wake's eyes turned cold and terrifying, his expression extremely distorted. He raised his finger, and the sea turned into countless sharp blades, tearing the whale into pieces. The cold blood spread in the fiercely surging sea. In the blood red, his expression was extremely ferocious. He retreated into the eye of the sea, and the earthquake immediately stopped. In the depths of the dark eye of the sea, the cold and dark sea swept his slender and strong body. Wake kept replaying the scene in his mind when she said they would break up. Was it all a lie to him? Saying that he was her dream, that she liked mermaids. Was it all a lie to him? Wake's golden eyes were stained by the Black Sea. The betrayal was very painful, but what made him completely desperate was she left him. Wake stood in the darkness and suddenly laughed softly. The laughter got louder and louder, and finally became extremely mournful. The ocean became ferocious. The king's heart-wrenching pain caused the entire ocean to become restless. Betraying him was equivalent to betraying the entire ocean. She couldn't run. She couldn't run anywhere. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 55. 50. Wei Wei Bai appeared at her house with the mermaid's heart in her hands. The beautiful bead rolled around in her hand. Then, she heard the sound of the favorability dropping. Wei Wei Bai felt that this time, it would drop to 0. In the end, the favorability stopped at 50. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while before saying, "This favorability is really tenacious." The system said, "While the male lead is still stuck in the eye of the sea, hurry up and figure out the secret. Then, we can go and attack and come back." Wei Wei Bai grasped the blue bead and nodded. In the end, before she could study it, the door to her house was kicked open shortly after she returned home. Chen Mo's face was wrapped up like a dumpling. He limped in with a crutch, followed by a few bodyguards. When he saw her, his eyes lit up like a wolf's. "I saw that you were back on the monitor. I specially came to arrest you, the traitor who was with the mermaid." Wei Wei Bai looked Chen Mo up and down. She said to the system, "Based on my experience of dealing with multiple people, I feel that this guy, Chen Mo, is interested in me." The system flipped through the information. Chen Mo, favorability is at 95. To make it easier for you to read it next time, you can click Save at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 686. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. What? 95? What did that mean? They had gone through thick and thin together. She thought that Vic's favorability had increased fast enough. But what was up with this guy's favorability? What did she do to get 95? Chen Mo limped in and smiled. "What's wrong? Where's your mermaid? Did she abandon you?" Wei Wei Bai looked at him in disbelief, her eyes full of doubt. Chen Mo stopped and avoided her eyes, then sneered, "You don't know how many surveillance cameras I've installed in your house. As long as you dare to come back, I'll catch you." Wei Wei Bai had already put the beads in her pocket, then she reached out her hands and handed them to Chen Mo. "For you." Chen Mo saw her slender wrists, white and delicate. His brain couldn't process it. "For me." Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "You're not going to catch me. Where are the handcuffs? Lock me up." Chen Mo gripped the crutch tightly and said with a smile, "Such rules, I thought you'd keep running." Wei Wei Bai looked at him with a strange look in her eyes. Chen Mo held his breath and avoided her eyes again. Suddenly, Wei Wei Bai took a few steps forward and approached him. Chen Mo's cold smile was a bit stiff, but he didn't show any special emotions. "Chen Mo, I'm tired," Wei Wei Bai said softly. Her voice actually had a hint of sweetness. This kind of sweetness seemed unconscious, but it could stir people's hearts. She smiled. "So can you be considerate of a colleague who almost died at sea and finally came back?" Chen Mo said stubbornly, "You're in cahoots with the mermaid." Wei Wei Bai turned around to get her clothes as if nothing had happened, then walked to the bathroom door, turned around and said to him, "I'm going to take a shower, you can wait if you want." With that, Wei Wei Bai took her clothes into the bathroom and closed the door. She had a favorability of 95, she could even die. As for where did the 95 points of favorability come from? This question was too profound. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she couldn't understand. Seeing her enter the bathroom, Chen Mo turned around awkwardly. He felt that she had seen through him. His lips trembled slightly as he used his walking stick to chase away the bodyguards who had come to the door. Scram, 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 all of you are going back. He thought that by scaring her, she would be afraid to beg for mercy. In the end, the plan was completely wrong. When he heard the sound of running water from the bathroom, he blushed and immediately walked out, closing the door behind him for Wei Wei Bai. After Wei Wei Bai finished showering, she saw that 95 was gone. His favorable impression of her was really high. This meant that he was going to let her go. She didn't care. She laid down flat, pulled the blanket over her, and closed her eyes to sleep. Tomorrow, she would start to get busy. It was not easy to study the secret of the mermaid's heart. While she was asleep, the water stains in the bathroom began to slowly condense. Transparent water droplets condensed into streams of water and crawled out of the door as if they were alive. Slowly, it came to the side of the bed. The transparent water was like a tentacle. It wanted to touch her toes that were exposed outside the quilt. But halfway through, it didn't have enough strength and fell back to the ground. In the deep sea, Wake, who had closed his eyes tightly, suddenly opened his eyes. There was a deep darkness in his eyes, which made him look exceptionally fierce. Then he smiled coldly and closed his eyes again. Soon, when he got out of the eye of the sea, he would be able to catch her back. He wanted to lock her in the abyss 30,000 meters below, and never be able to return to the land. The expression on Wake's cold face became cruel and ferocious. He would not let her see the sun again, nor would he give her a second chance to betray him. Collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 687. Wei Wei Bai became a busy researcher again. Chen Mo said that he wanted to catch her, but in the end, he was a coward. He even knew that she wanted a research lab, so he specially opened one for her. But he kept mocking and ridiculing her behind her back every day, often threatening that she had a criminal record and could be suspended at any time. If she didn't tightly cling to his golden thigh, she would be caught and sentenced. Wei Wei Bai said coldly, "Following me every day like this, those who don't know would think that you like me." Chen Mo was slapped in the face by this sentence, and immediately stopped for a few days. He didn't dare to appear beside Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai was busy studying that lousy mermaid's heart, and didn't have time to care about the strategy. Vic should still be in the eye of the sea. If she could complete the side quest as soon as possible, there was still a chance to get the favorability back. If she couldn't, Wei Wei Bai remembered the day she came. That big pool of blood and corpses. She always felt that her end wouldn't be good. The system didn't add insult to injury, but was busy collecting information on the mermaid's heart. This side quest was crazy to the point of fuck it. The system sometimes wondered if the main system found something, which was why it was jumping around like this. Wei Wei Bai was still the best mermaid research expert. She was afraid that the mermaid's heart would be discovered, so she used the excuse of creating another mermaid king to fool the people in the laboratory. A mermaid king had been born, although it was judged to have failed because of murder. But it was indeed the most perfect mermaid in the laboratory. Wei Wei Bai studied the mermaid's heart. The system began to study how to make a mermaid be born. It didn't matter if it was a mermaid king in the end, as long as it was a mermaid, it was fine as long as it could fool people. Although the system was reliable for a while, it didn't catch her every day to ridicule her. She was still tired. Not everyone could be a scientist. Wei Wei Bai was such a hard-working person, but she was almost out of breath under the pressure of the workload. As a result, when they reached home, Gyu was lying on the sofa like a dead fish, barely hanging on to life. She complained, "Slagstem, give me a more leisurely identity next time. If this goes on, I'm going to die from overwork." The system said, "Ding, your family's handsome, gentle, elegant, handsome, tall, and smart little cutie babies have all temporarily left. If there's an emergency, please shout, "I love Marshall 004" 3 times and I'll be back. Wei Bai, how did it come up with such a shameful line? Where's your face? His face was bigger than the universe. Wei Bai then remembered that the system wanted to go back to the system library to look up information about the mermaid's heart. He would leave for a while. After so many planes, it was rare for the system to leave her. Wei felt empty, cold and cheerless. It felt too good. That damned system finally disappeared for a while. She felt as if the whole world had brightened up. Who would be willing to have a non-stop ding-ding-ding sound on their forehead every day? Wei Bai happily went to get her clothes. She wanted to take a bath and then have a good sleep. After filling the bathtub with water, Wei Bai entered the water. She leaned her head on the bathtub and closed her eyes to think about the strategy. She could only pray that Vic was still in the eye of the sea. Otherwise, he would probably climb up to take revenge on her. In the information about mermaids in her mind, it said that mermaids were very vengeful creatures. And their means of revenge were very cruel. Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu. COMT. Chapter 688. Wei Bai tried hard to recall the scene just now. After a moment of silence, she said, "This human language is too good." When she left the ocean, didn't that stupid fish only know how to speak one word at a time? But today, when he spoke the human language, he was even more fluent than her. Also, Wei Bai rubbed her red cheeks. This is so uncomfortable. She ran away halfway, not afraid of her endocrine disorder. The system had just returned to see its host lying on the bed, looking like she was about to ascend to heaven. "What's wrong? Did you miss me?" Wei Bai said, "Why aren't you dead if I miss you?" The system whimpered, "You dead person, you're so cruel." Wei Bai, every time she thought that the system had reached its limit of disgusting her, it would always come up with a way to disgust her even more. Wei Bai rubbed her temples. "There's a problem. Can Vic control water?" The system said, "He can as long as he completely awakens the ability of the Mermaid King." Wei Bai said, "I don't think I should take a shower. If he did this every time she took a shower, she would be killed sooner or later." The system said, "Why don't you take a shower? It's not like the male lead can appear through your water pipe and come to you." Wei Bai was silent. Then the system was silent as well. At the bottom of the sea, in the deepest eye of the sea, the violet water flow stirred up, and a tall figure appeared. His eyes were colder than the darkness in the eye of the sea. He didn't have enough strength. He looked at his hand and thought of the softness he had just touched. He slowly closed his eyes and continued to recharge. The power to control water could make him appear anywhere in this world as an incarnation of water. But this required a huge amount of strength. He still couldn't hold on for too long. And the eye of the sea needed him. This was the price he had to pay for trusting humans. No, it was the price he had to pay for trusting her. The system flipped through the information on the mermaid's heart. Because there are too many planes, the information on each plane is incomplete. The library only has a portion of the plane's information. Wei Bai was already flipping through the information. The mermaid's heart, she repeated it several times and finally saw the information about the mermaid's heart. The fragmented information was all about the ancient information of the mermaid's heart. The origin of the mermaid's heart was the heart of the mermaid king. That heart required both great sorrow and strong love to form. This was the story of the king of the mermaid's heart. When he was young, he saved a princess in a storm and put her on the beach. The prince from the neighboring country had just arrived, and the princess opened her eyes, thinking that it was the prince who had saved her. She fell for him at first sight. The merfolk watched from afar, but did not dare to approach. But he had already fallen in love with the princess. Wait, why does this story sound so familiar? Wei Wei Bai's cold face finally couldn't take it anymore. What kind of stupid information is this? Even if you want to make things up, you can't just use some random fairy tale to trick me. Wasn't this Andersen's fairy tale of the Little Mermaid? Even a 3-year-old child would have heard of it. The system said, let's not be so calculative. What do you think after reading this story? Wei Wei Bai flipped through it again and again. What could she think? Did she need to write an 800-word review for this kind of kindergarten bedtime story? Could it be that the rest of the story was different? Wei Wei Bai patiently read on. Chapter 689. The mermaid went to the black wizard to ask for leg-splitting medicine, lost his voice, and walked as if he was walking on the tip of a knife. Then he went to the land to find the princess. The princess didn't notice him at all, and the next day he jumped into the sea and became the mermaid's heart. Damn, do you have to be so tricked, thinking that the bubble became the mermaid's heart? Was this an original work? This didn't even need to make up nonsense, just copy and paste. Wei Wei Bai was so angry that her hands were shaking. This is the information you found? System, Wei Wei Bai said in despair and anger. How can this find out the secret of the mermaid's heart? It can't be that the secret is that when a mermaid falls in love with a human, it will become the mermaid's heart. Ding! Congratulations to the host for finding the secret of the mermaid's heart. Side mission completed. Wei Wei Bai and the system, oh, wow, so careless, completed the side mission. The two systems couldn't believe it, their faces full of shock. Ding! It's time to explain. The mermaid's heart is a curse caused by the resentment of all the mermaids for generations after the mermaid king fell in love with a human. It will cut the mermaid king's flesh and finally leave him with a heart full of love and resentment. This heart has a strong power, but it is full of ominous. The day the mermaid king completely falls in love with a human, it will be cursed to death. The method to remove the curse, method. Damn, you can't continue, this is more than half a will, the murderer is, it's still a scam. Wei Wei Bai and the system cursed at the same time. System, suffocating to death. Wei Wei Bai and the system waited for a while. Then they heard the next words, the information is a bit long, I'm too lazy to read it, just send it directly. A long piece of information appeared in Wei Wei Bai's mind. She tried to pull herself together, and sorted out the information in her hands. The standard for mermaids to completely fall in love with a human was 95 favorability. In other words, the curse would break out and kill Vic when he reached the 95th level. And the way to lift the curse was, a human heart that fell in love with a mermaid. As long as there was a human who deeply loved the mermaid and was willing to sacrifice their life to the mermaid's heart, a mermaid king would be able to escape. Wei Wei Bai looked at the information and fell into deep thought. This method of dispelling the curse was truly vicious. At first glance, it was the resentment of the merfolk. In any case, the source of this curse was that mermaids and humans would not end well together. Wei Wei Bai thought about it and finally said, Tongzi, are there any discounted goods that can deceive the mermaid's heart and make it think that I'm in love with a mermaid? The system replied, yes, but other than the system instant noodles on sale, there's nothing else on sale in the mall. Wei Wei Bai hesitated, how much HP? System, 500 HP. Wei Bai, poverty left her with nothing. She sank into deep melancholy. The difference between a discount and a no discount was too big. Wasn't he forcing the poor host to die by asking for 100 or 10,000 at every turn? Wei Bai said helplessly, let's talk about it when the favorability reaches 90. Maybe by then, the mall would have a discount. Although the secret of the mermaid's heart was solved. Wei Bai continued to study mermaids to maintain her persona. In addition, Chen Mo's inexplicable 95 had set up an inescapable net around her to monitor her. She could not think of a way to escape. More than 10 days had passed. During this time, Wei Bai was wrinkled when she bathed. To make it easier for you to read next time, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Crossover system, Adonis, come over here. Chapter 690. They didn't see the water turn into Vic. No meeting, no interaction, the favorability didn't increase. Casually raising a mermaid was also successful from the culture tank. But it was an ordinary mermaid, not a king mermaid. Failure was normal, but no one complained about it. It was a female mermaid. Long blue hair like seaweed, a body of 17 or 18 years old. She looked exceptionally beautiful. Wei Bai lowered her head to record the information. Although the pen was moving, she was actually distracted. The mermaid had been cultivated. Should she find a chance to go to the beach and jump in? The heart of the mermaid was on her, and she couldn't drown. And in the sea, it was always easier to find Vic. Suddenly, she sensed someone beside her and looked up. She saw Chen Mo, who had returned to his human form, wearing a white lab robe, and his hair was combed neatly with hair gel. He smiled politely and calmly, it doesn't matter if you failed this time, just continue the research. Wei Bai looked at him calmly and put down the pen in her hand. Then she nodded with a flat expression. Chen Mo looked at her with some excitement, but he still held back his excited expression. You've been too tired recently, the lab decided to give you a holiday. Wei Bai said calmly, thank you. Chen Mo said, is there anywhere you want to go? I can accompany you on a trip to relax. A man said to a woman that he wanted to go on a trip to relax. Who couldn't see this thought? Wei Bai's eyes became more strange, and she said calmly, I think we're not familiar with each other. The excitement in Chen Mo's eyes was broken by sadness. His lips trembled, and he struggled to keep calm and said, you're a suspect of colluding with the mermaids. You need someone to watch you wherever you go, and your watcher is me. Wei Bai was indifferent. She stretched out her hand, give me your surveillance power of attorney, and you keep saying that I colluded with the mermaids, where's the evidence? Chen Mo pulled out his phone and opened a file, this is the surveillance power of attorney, as for the evidence of your collusion with the mermaids. Could she say that he burned it? When she went out to sea with the mermaids, the surveillance along the way and so on. Take pictures of their route. Also, when she went out to sea to rent a boat, she used her own ID card. This kind of criminal was extremely stupid. After he got ashore and was still in the hospital, he asked his brother to get the first-hand information. They were all destroyed. He still remembered his brother's mocking words. What's wrong? Are you in love? Why would you do such a thing that doesn't benefit yourself? This incident made him the laughingstock of his family. Chen Mo replied calmly, I would have arrested you a long time ago if I had the evidence. You're now a suspect, so keeping an eye on you is the most important thing. Wei Bai was completely unable to take his words seriously when faced with his favorable impression of 95 points. If it was someone with a more normal character, she might let down her guard if he had a favorable impression of 95 points. But was Chen Mo a normal person? 95 favorable impression points suddenly shot up. She had asked the system. Before she came, his favorability towards the original owner was -5. After that, they only met a few times, and their favorability was maintained within the safe range of 10. Until the last time they went out to sea to catch the mermaids, there were guns and storms. Coupled with her kick, his head had hit the railing and he had a concussion. After that, his favorability was at 95 points. This kind of increase in favorability, Bai Weiwei used her own rich experience to analyze. Was Chinamo a super masochist? Or a pervert? Download the https://www.sashu.com/download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://www.sashu.com download the full article, https://sashu.com//there. Chapter 691. The former caused the favorability to rise. The latter was abnormal. Wasn't it normal for favorability to rise randomly? Weiwei Bai looked at him from the corner of her eyes, then said, I want to go to sea. Chinamo said, go to sea. Didn't the mermaid abandon you? Why are you going to sea? Weiwei Bai must have been abandoned by the mermaid for her to come back so suddenly. Weiwei Bai pointed at the newly created mermaid, set her free. Chinamo frowned, the mermaid has a grudge against us, Weiwei Bai. Weiwei Bai's serious face showed a trace of soft sadness. Why do we have to hurt each other? Humans and mermaids don't have to kill each other. This mermaid has bad genes and needs to return to the sea to survive. She is a sin that I created. Whenever I think of her being destroyed, it hurts so much. The system said. You're so pretentious that I can't eat. Weiwei Bai said, that's good, it saves on life. Chen Mo's frown slowly relaxed, you're so kind. Weiwei Bai sighed, forget it, I won't force it if it doesn't work. It's just that I'll probably live in a nightmare of guilt for the rest of my life. She turned to leave after saying that. Chen Mo suddenly stopped her, I'll go to sea with you. It takes a lot of power to set a mermaid free. I'll go to sea with you, then you can set her free. Weiwei Bai suddenly turned around, a trace of disbelief flashed in her eyes. Then she showed a happy smile, thank you, Chinamo. Chinamo was petrified on the spot, his heart beating like thunder. He couldn't stop bouncing around. Ever since that day, she jumped into the sea without hesitation just to save that mermaid. It broke the stubborn impression he had for many years that people were selfish and ugly. She became his imagination of goodness and beauty. It also made him find the feeling of living. He had seen too many bloody killings and dirty deals. When he was in complete despair, he saw Weiwei Bai. She was like the only ray of sunshine in his life. Weiwei Bai, who didn't know that she had turned into a ray of light, began to pack her luggage. The next day, they boarded the military ship that Chin Mo called for. On the boat was the mermaid who had just been born. In the middle of the sea, Weiwei Bai came to the water trough where the mermaid was placed and gently said to her, go back to the sea. The mermaid cried out weakly. Weiwei Bai knew that Chin Mo was behind her, so she could only maintain her persona and continue, it's not that I don't want you anymore. You're the best mermaid I've ever created. The water in the trough suddenly shook, as if it was about to overflow. Weiwei Bai did not notice and continued to maintain her persona. I like you very much. I originally wanted to continue raising you, but your body is weak and you need the nourishment of the sea. The water in the sink began to become sharp and ferocious. It silently turned into a water chain that wanted to crawl out of the sink. But Chen Mo walked over. Weiwei, let's release it. It'll be dark if we wait any longer. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Just as she turned around and was about to leave, she felt a wet touch on her cheek. Chen Mo lowered his head and waited for her to turn around. His lips had just touched her soft cheek when he heard her words. From afar, it looked like an intimate kiss. Behind her, the mermaid's sharp scream suddenly rang out. Wei Wei Bai was shocked. She turned around and saw that the water trough was full of terrifying blood. The beautiful mermaid from just now was torn to pieces, and the eyeballs on her ferocious head were gouged out. How savage! The water in the trough was like the ghosts in horror movies, desperately running out of the trough. The water turned into sharp transparent knives, cutting the cabin and breaking the walls of the ship. In an instant, it came under Wei Wei Bai, wrapped around her ankles, and pulled her under the broken cabin in an instant. Chen Mo shouted, "Wei Wei!" He reached out to pull her, but the water seemed to have a grudge against him. It turned into sharp water arrows and all of them attacked him. Chen Mo's expression changed and he immediately rolled to one side. Wei Wei Bai also lost her chance to escape and was swept away by the water. The water still had the blood of the dead mermaid, making her extremely uncomfortable. Her whole body was pulled into the sea. In the sea, a pair of ferocious golden eyes appeared in front of her. In the hazy mist, his sharp thin lips slowly curled up. "Tell me, who is your favorite mermaid?" Chapter 692. Tell me, who is your favorite mermaid? Wei Wei Bai immediately opened her mouth and answered, "Gulyalu, Gulyalu." Forgetting that she was in the water, she almost choked to death when she opened her mouth. She quickly shut her mouth and furrowed her brows tightly. She struggled with all her might to swim up. But as soon as she struggled, the mermaid on the other side immediately roared angrily. The sharp threatening voice immediately smashed into Wei Wei Bai's eardrums, and she was almost stunned by this threatening warning. With this hesitation, the mermaid on the other side had already swam over quickly, stretched out his strong long arms, and held her in his arms. The cold and beautiful dark blue fishtail had the power to stir up the sea. It made the nearby sea begin to become restless, and a huge whirlpool appeared. Wei Wei Bai was held in his arms, and a second before she suffocated, he took her to the surface of the sea. The storm seemed to be called by the mermaid, the dark sea, the gloomy sky, and the heavy rain. The military ship that brought her could be submerged in the sea at any time. Wei Wei Bai struggled to open her eyes. The mermaid behind her, his arms were like iron pincers, holding her tightly without letting go. "Those who covet you will all die, I will kill whoever you like." This sentence was cold and piercing, with a paranoid ruthlessness. Wei Wei Bai was cold in the sea and couldn't help but shiver. Wake thought she was afraid, his sharp fingers grabbed her waist, and said fiercely, "You too, humans who betray me will be cursed by the sea, you can't escape where there is water." As long as she returned to the sea would report to him. Even on land, as long as she came into contact with water. He could also sense her breath and know where she was. This was the power of the curse when he first put it down. Wake would rather this curse was not used. His nails cut her clothes, and when he was about to cut her skin, he hesitated. In the end, he stopped this dangerous action, and his fingers became gentle again on her waist. The mermaid's heart automatically returned to Vic's hand because it encountered the seawater. After Wake got the mermaid's heart, he reached out to cover her mouth and nose and stuffed a deep sea pearl into her mouth. Wei Wei Bai swallowed the pearl. "I feel like I'm going to have stomach stones sooner or later." Vic grabbed her waist with one hand and plunged into the sea. His speed was like lightning, and he reached the deep sea in an instant. The ocean was getting deeper and deeper. In the end, Wei Wei Bai was a little confused. How long had they been swimming? Wei Wei Bai raised her head and struggled to raise her neck. She saw that his delicate and beautiful jaw was tense, and his golden eyes were filled with hostility. She tried to connect with him. Wake, in fact, the mermaid I like is you. This sentence caused his swimming speed to slow down. But soon, he sped up. In the dark sea, countless shining deep-sea fish floated around them. An even more terrifying deep-sea abyss appeared, as if some monster was waiting to eat people. Wei Wei Bai once again felt that the deep sea was terrifying. But Wake seemed to see the destination. His thin lips gently hooked up, revealing a grin. Then he took Wei Wei Bai down. This was the most inescapable place in the ocean. Only mermaids could reach this place, and even humans couldn't come here. The deep sea 30,000 meters below sea level. Wake saw the cave he made and swam in. The upper layer of the cave was dry, and many gems were thrown in. After he took her in, he threw her on the dry seaweed. Then he changed his legs and walked naked in front of Wei Wei Bai. The quick to read at https://www.sashu.com/quick at https://www.sashu.com. The quick to read on. Calm the quick. Chapter 693. Those words had simply shattered his cold and hard fortress. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 65. Wei Wei Bai got up and reached out to touch him. Vic showed his sharp teeth and said coldly, "Get lost, I won't believe you, and I won't give you the mermaid's heart and let you escape from me." The last time she was taken away by the mermaid's heart, it was the first time he experienced what it meant to be heartbroken. That kind of pain could drive anyone crazy. He would never believe her again. Afraid that she would say something he couldn't resist, he dove into the water and disappeared. Beasts were easily swayed by words. Even if they knew it was a lie, they would still be swayed by their loved ones. Wei Wei Bai sat alone by the water, gone far. The system said faintly, "Scared by you, he ran out of the cave and abused those glowing little animals." Wei Wei Bai said, "If only I could jump into the sea faster." She came to the sea to find a chance to jump into the sea, and then have a chance to explain the misunderstanding. But she didn't expect that Vic would arrive first and destroy the boat. Now, any explanation would seem like a quibble. The system said, "It doesn't matter if you're fast or slow, sell yourself and your favorability will fly up immediately." Wei Wei Bai's face was bitter. What if it flies to 95? If this fish dies, who will attack the remaining 5 favorability points? The system said, "You really want to sell yourself?" Wei Wei Bai, the system sighed, "I still remember in your first world, you were so desperate because of your first kiss, but now you're taking the initiative to want to have sex." Wei Wei Bai, the system let out a fatherly laugh, "He, our family's Wei Wei has also grown up." Wei Wei Bai, she was so disgusted that she didn't know how to respond. Wei Wei Bai forcefully changed the topic, "Is the thing that deceived the mermaid's heart discounted?" The system glanced at the price and said, "It has increased. It has increased from 500 to 1000 HP, Wei Wei Bai, there must be something wrong with this shopping mall. They can give discounts and raise prices as they please. The prices are just random." The system asked, "What if there's no discount?" Wei Wei Bai, "What else can I do? I'll go sell myself. You go and see if there are any tycoon systems in the system world. See if you can sell me for 1,000,000 or so HP." The system said, "You're so ugly, you can't be sold for a good price." Wei Wei Bai. Then turn off the blocker. System, so the main course is here after all the rambling. Wei Wei Bai said, "It's off now. Let me warm it up and see if I can catch a fish." The system's tone turned bitter. This isn't a joke. You might not be able to control yourself. Wei Bai, then go sell yourself. See if you can earn 1000 HP to buy something for me. System, what the fuck? I've seen systems sell hosts, but I've never seen a host sell a system. Wei Bai said, turn it off. I'll save as much HP as I can. Besides, after so many planes, I've never experienced what it means to be tempted. Acting comes from real life. The system said, why does it have to do with acting? Wei Bai said, I've experienced what it feels like to be tempted. Later on, when I meet a worthy opponent, I'll be able to better portray the illusion of being tempted. The system fell silent and finally sighed. Forget it. As long as you can handle it, I'll turn off the blocker for you. But don't do it again. Before there was an emotional blocker, who knew how many hosts had gone crazy. No matter how cold and ruthless a person was, they would not be able to withstand the torture of so many planes. Besides, Wei Bai was not cold at all. ///// Chapter 694. Wake poked a lot of fish to death and wanted to take it back for Wei Bai to eat. The environment here was harsh, not as comfortable and luxurious as the shallow sea area, where there was everything. But it was the safest, because only here, no one could come. Ordinary mermaids could not dive here. Not to mention humans, there was no human submarine that could dive to this depth. It was just him and her. Wake showed a reassuring smile, but when he thought of her words just now, his heart suddenly hurt. He pinched the fish in his hand into minced meat. In the dark deep sea, the mermaid's cold and deep facial features looked unusually cruel. She was still delusional to lie to him. Don't dream. Wei Bai had just let the system remove the shield when a slender figure appeared in the water next to her. It was Wake. His black hair floated on the surface of the water, like a terrible ghost, coldly looking at by Wei. Wei Bai felt a little nervous. She pinched a water plant in her fingers to ease her tension. You're back. Wei Bai showed a gentle smile and said. Wake's brows furrowed even deeper. He reached out and threw a strangely shaped raw fish at her feet. Wei Bai's smiling face was a little tight, but she didn't say anything. Wake's eyes were gloomy, his voice was cold, eat it. Wei Bai's mouth twitched, she glanced at the fish. Flat body, dead fish eyes, a few wriggling tentacles, from time to time spitting out a few mouthfuls of mud. She felt that if she ate it, she would die from the poison. Wake showed a cruel smile. He suddenly climbed out of the water, his beautiful tail slapping the water, full of irritation. Didn't you say that you like me? I'm the most special. Then why didn't you eat the fish I caught? Wei Bai picked up the fish and looked at its dead fish eyes. Then the fish was scared and turned green. Wei Bai, you're going to poison her. Is this a version of Wu Daolong? Come, Dawei, eat the fish. Wei Bai's face stiffened. She accepted her fate and put the fish back. However, the fish suddenly grew 4 legs and rushed into the water. Seeing her frightened look, Vic was full of malicious sarcasm as if his prank had succeeded. It seems that your love is nothing more than that. After he finished speaking, he stretched out his hand, and the fish that had just escaped appeared in his hand again. Pooh! The fish was crushed into minced meat in his hands. Then he came in front of her and put a ball of minced meat in front of her mouth. Eat it. This is your punishment for betraying me. She did not love him. She only knew how to deceive him. He would rather she hate him to death and not give him a good face than let him continue to sink deeper and deeper into this lie. Wei Bai knocked on the system. Are you sure you turned off the signal blocker? The system replied, I did. Are you used to it? Are you aware that your love for the male lead is like an uncontrollable tsunami? Wei Bai, I don't love him yet. I seem to dislike him more and more. Shut up in a dark room and not do anything serious. What's with forcing people to eat raw minced fish? This lousy fish can't be loved. Wei Bai pursed her lips. Because of anger, her pale face was tinged with a few traces of red. It was shockingly gorgeous. Just when Vic thought she was going to be angry, she suddenly lowered her head and sucked on the tip of his finger. There was a little bit of minced meat on it. Sharp nails, a light fishy smell, sweet minced fish. Her tentative action unconsciously used more force. The tip of her tongue sucked on his fingertip, and her teeth gently knocked on his finger. Vic's whole body was completely frozen. His heart was like a drum, beating wildly. His fingers were numb. Only the touch of her lips and tongue was frighteningly clear. Wei Bai looked up faintly. Her eyes were a little red, and her delicate face was actually flirtatious at this time. Compared to those most enchanting female mermaids, she was tens of thousands of times more attractive. Wei Bai let go of his fingertip. As if she did not know how seductive she was, there was a hint of pleading in her tone. Vic, let's not mess around, okay? I really like you. Vic's heartbeat suddenly stopped and quieted down. He felt that he was finished. Her seduction made him utterly defeated. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 75. Full text // Download. / Chapter 695. Humans were indeed the best at deceiving others. Wake remembered that he had heard a lot about how cunning humans were. His Adam's apple bobbed, his fingers trembled so much that his fingernails almost scratched her lips. Almost instinctively, he pulled his hand back. Then he turned around, went to the water, and began to wash his hands. He washed the fish in his hands clean, and he wanted to wash away the feeling of her kissing his fingers. It would be great if he could wash away his feelings as well. Although the system said that the emotional shield was turned off, Wei Bai couldn't feel it at all now. She wondered if it was because they had too little contact. Therefore, she reached out her demonic claws, wanting to touch his strong and sturdy back. As a result, before her fingers touched it, Wake seemed to have eyes on the back of his head, his golden pupils were full of burning anger. He plunged into the water, shaking off Wei Bai's face with water droplets. Then he looked at her with a cold and fierce expression. His hands in the water clenched into fists. Don't be delusional. You think you can seduce me, and I will listen to you. Wei Bai withdrew her hand as if nothing had happened, then hugged her knees with both hands. Her face without glasses was delicate and clean, and even had a trace of innocence. She looked at him calmly. The mermaid became nervous, and his heart beat wildly again. Just one look from her was enough to make him feel as helpless and flustered as a newborn cub. Wei Bai sighed faintly, her eyes soft and sad, cold. Wake's beautiful brows furrowed. And the water here is heavy, my bones can't stand it for a long time, and it will definitely leave behind pain. Wake pursed his thin lips, clenched his teeth tightly, and refused to respond. Did she think that he would still feel sorry for her? Wei Bai put her face on her knees again, looking very pitiful, and looked at him with watery eyes. And I'm hungry, humans eat raw all the time, they will definitely get gastric problems. Wake soaked in the water, his hair floating around, looking like a delicate lifeless sculpture. In fact, he was similar to a sculpture now, to resist the weak compromise in his heart. He used all his strength to reject Wei Bai's words. If he listened to one sentence, he would listen to two sentences. In the end, even the mermaid's heart might be deceived by her. Wei Bai suddenly covered her mouth and sneezed. Wake couldn't help but look at her. His expression was frighteningly stiff. Suddenly, he dived into the water and disappeared. The smile on Wei Bai's face gradually disappeared. The system carefully probed, "How does it feel to turn off the shield?" Wei Bai was expressionless. "I'm not excited by love, but I really want to kill that fish." She was locked up in a dark cave 30,000 meters below the ground. Not only was there no cell phone or computer, but there wasn't even a decent bed. Moreover, there was nothing to eat even if he was hungry. Even if the clothes were wet, there was no way to change them. It was so exciting to be locked up in a small black room. She felt like she had been thrown into a coal pit to dig for coal. What happened to the ferocious mermaids? She had only shown a little seductive action, and he had run away as if she was going to force herself on him. Wake floated to the shallow sea area, where the mermaids lived were closer to human society. There were also many kinds of human things. Indeed, human beings were different from mermaids. They couldn't stay in the water for a long time. Wake ordered the mermaids to collect a lot of human things. The mermaid's heart was thrown back into the eye of the sea. The bottom of the sea was still peaceful. But there were a lot of gossip and rumors. /mobile Chapter 697. Wei Bai slowly calmed down. Wake was still singing softly. This was a song that mermen sang to their loved ones. It also had the effect of soothing nightmares. Mermen were creatures that relied on emotions. Even when singing, if there was no love, it would not be able to sing with power. He loved her deeply, so the song was full of gentle feelings for her. Wei Bai had not had nightmares for a long time. While blocking emotions, it also blocked many of her subtle feelings. When she was in the plane, she had a clear goal and never thought of retreating. Even more not to have nightmares. This was the first time she took the risk of turning off the emotion-blocking machine. It was also the first time she clearly felt some emotional changes that she had never noticed before. Nightmares were about the failure of the strategy. When she failed, she was powerless in the face of her life points that kept slipping away. After returning to modern times, she found that she still died on the morning of the heart attack. Lying there alone, he slowly turned into a rotting corpse. This was the deepest fear in her heart. This fear turned into a terrible desire to survive, supporting her to go through so many planes. The nightmare made her very uncomfortable. Suddenly, a gentle and beautiful song sounded. She slowly opened her eyes and the nightmare left her. With her eyes half closed, she saw Wake holding her, his fingers stroking her hair soothingly, softly singing a song like a lullaby. She stared at him blankly. Wake sensed that she was awake and quickly closed his mouth. He did not have time to put away the gentle love in his expression, looking a little embarrassed. Wei Bai smiled at him. This smile might not have been carefully calculated. But it was full of sweet feelings. She reached out, hugged him, and rested her head on his shoulder. Then she did not speak, closed her eyes, and continued to sleep peacefully. At this moment, the embrace of this stupid fish became the warmest home for her to resist the nightmare. Wake stiffened and heard her breathing gradually calm down. He finally relaxed and exhaled, then like a thief, softly sang the song again. Her smile just now. So cute. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 80. The host has turned off the emotion blocking device. Emotions fluctuate, please manually turn on the blocker. The system faced the main system's automatic reminder. It chose not to see it. Then it said to itself, it's not fun to be moved, you'll get hurt. So it would not happen again. From the moment it chose her as its host, it had the idea of protecting her life even if it had to sacrifice everything. The system glanced at the wheel above its head. In the end, it sighed and no longer made a sound. Then, he looked at his own storage unit and couldn't help but cry out loud. He finished his instant noodles and sobbed. Wei Wei Bai's life. The bed was very comfortable. He was afraid that it would be too cold, so he set up a large stove on the stone wall. From time to time, he would roast a few sweet potatoes. Didn't have a phone was books was reading was also was also was book was had were things. He was like the mermaid version of Mr. Snail. Was she. When she fell asleep at night, something would appear. Bai Weiwei belatedly realized that he was punishing her. Punishing her betrayal, so he couldn't be nice to her. // Chapter 698. Bai Weiwei sighed at the system. This is too straightforward. Look at other people's betrayal punishments. At the drop of a hat, it's digging out the heart and womb. Otherwise, it's killing your whole family and giving you a one-stop sexual abuse service. This merfolk emperor with merfolk blood, why didn't she learn anything? The system trembled. Who treats betrayal so cruelly? Why haven't I seen it? Wei Wei Bai silently raised the book in her hand. Cold President's darling, love you to torture you to death. System. When Wei Wei Bai heard the sound of water breaking, she immediately stuffed the book back, and then pulled out an esoteric book in the field of biology and read it. Suddenly she looked high and mighty. Wake was dripping wet and wearing a pair of loose trousers on the outside before he walked in. He saw her seriously looking down at a book. It was a book on her profession. Was she still attached to the land? So she was still unwilling to put down her profession. Wake's golden eyes darkened, and he didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just noticed him. Wake, come here. Wake looked at her indifferently, and finally he reluctantly walked over. Wei Wei Bai picked up a towel, dried his hair, gently massaged it, and whispered, "Don't take it lightly. If your hair is always wet, your head will hurt when you get old." Mermaids were creatures of the water. They would die if they weren't wet. Wake's expression was tight, and he didn't say anything. Wei Wei Bai bowed her head, and her fingers gently pressed his scalp. Wake stiffened his neck, too comfortable to let her know. Wei Wei Bai said, "Wake, do you know? The mermaid's heart has a secret. I took it away last time because I wanted to study this secret." Speaking of the mermaid's heart. Wake's expression changed, he gritted his teeth, and his eyes turned cold. "You really are good to me to get the mermaid's heart." She tried her best to make him trust her and like her. But it was just to get the mermaid's heart. He said coldly, "What secret? Is it the secret that can destroy the merfolk? So you can't wait to sell this secret to the humans so that they can deal with the mermaids?" Wei Wei Bai's fingers paused, and her voice lowered. "No, I just want the merfolk and humans not to kill each other, so I want to," Wake interrupted her sarcastically. "You betrayed me no matter what I wanted." Bai Weiwei's action of wiping his hair stopped. Wake felt that the atmosphere was a little quiet, and suddenly something wet hit his head. His cold expression changed, and he couldn't help but raise his head. However, he saw Wei Wei Bai looking at him with tears in her eyes. He couldn't look her in the eye. "I didn't betray you." She reached out and calmly wiped the tears from her eyes. Speak without any vehemence. However, it made him feel a kind of heart-wrenching pain. Wake's eyes became ruthless, and he came to lie to him again. He grabbed her hand and stuffed a pearl into her mouth. Then, he dragged her into the water. After a relatively long time upstream, they finally came to the surface of the sea. Wei Wei Bai felt that the sun was a little dazzling, and she saw many ships not far away. Wake took her immediately to the largest military ship, and he nimbly climbed onto the ship with Wei Wei Bai on his back. On the deck, Chen Mo was reprimanding others. Bombs are fine, submarines are also fine, give me the best, I don't believe that I can't find people. Wei Wei Bai blinked. Wake had already pushed her onto the deck. Chen Imo heard the sound and quickly turned around. When he saw Wei Wei Bai, he became excited. Wei Wei. Wake stood beside her and stared at her with his golden eyes. He showed a cold and bloodthirsty smile. Now you have to choose, do you want him or me? She said that she wouldn't betray him, just because she didn't have a choice. As long as she had a choice, she would still return to the land and return to this human man. T. Chapter 699. Wei Wei Bai's mouth couldn't help but twitch. Why does it sound so shameful to hear such a cliché line? She struggled to get up, but when she looked back, she saw Wake standing behind her, leaning against the railing. His cold eyes were a deep golden color. He looked at her so seriously and stared at her with all his might. Chen Imo saw the mermaid behind her, and his face changed. He waved his hand to get the weapons ready. Then he slowly walked over. Wei Wei, come here, I'll take you back. His tone was so soft, as if he was afraid of disturbing the mermaid behind Wei Wei. The mermaid's fingers were terrible, and they were the best weapon. And the place where Wei Wei Bai was standing was just where the mermaid could raise his hand to attack. This made Chen Imo not dare to speak loudly. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be stunned for a moment. She looked at Wake somewhat helplessly, and then glanced at Chen Imo. When she looked at Chen Imo, Wake's fingers were holding the railing, and his sharp nails directly cut the iron railing. He stared at Wei Wei Bai, and his heart turned cold. It was like being peeled out by her and thrown into an ice bucket. Wei Wei Bai couldn't care about anything, don't hurt him. Chen Mo's footsteps paused, and he looked at her with some shock. Wei Wei Bai saw that those people had begun to prepare the weapons to shoot the mermaid. Her eyes flashed with panic, and her hand couldn't help but grab Wake's fingers. Wake's nails retracted, so as not to hurt her soft fingers. Wei Wei Bai pursed her lips, and couldn't care about anything else. She turned back and said to Wake, take me to the sea, Wake, it's dangerous for you here. Isn't it courting death to rashly board a military ship? No matter how powerful the mermaid is, it's still in the water. Without the sea, any weapon can cause great harm to him. Wake's cold eyes were shattered by the anxiety on her face. His tone was still calm, don't you like this human? Under the calmness, his fingers grasped her even harder. He refused to let her go. Wei Wei Bai frowned, her lips trembling with excitement. She repeated with some doubt, I like this human. Chen Imo. Chen Imo stood not far away. When he heard her say this, he couldn't help but stop, wanting to hear her answer. Wake's eyes were so cold that it could cut people. He said coldly, let him kiss you. Wei Wei Bai was stunned for a moment, and then she laughed softly as if she heard a joke. She looked up. Her gaze was gentle like the sun above the ocean, warm and full of love. Then, she raised her head and kissed him gently on the corner of his lips. Now that I'm kissing you, does that mean I like you? The mermaid demon mermaid made Tai Di Chen's come Tai Di. Chen Imo, Chen Imo, Chen Imo, Chen Imo, Chen Imo, and Chen Imo calm and Chen Imo. Chen Imo didn't look too good. He tried his best to stay calm and said casually, I don't like you either. Don't flatter yourself. Even if he was rejected, he couldn't be embarrassed. Chen Imo felt like his heart was about to split open. Wei Wei Bai's expression softened, I won't go back to the mainland in the future. Chen Imo, help me quit the lab job. You can treat me as a traitor or want to arrest me, but I want to introduce my husband to you. Chen Mo's voice trembled out of tune, husband. Wei Wei Bai looked up. Under the sun, the mermaid's eyes turned from gold to dark blue. His hatred seemed to fade because of her words. Wake also repeated softly, husband. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click at the bottom to record this reading. Chapter 700. The two men said the same thing at the same time, but both their tones and emotions were different. Wei Wei Bai gently swept her eyes over Wake. Wake, I don't have any way out, I've already betrayed humanity, only you are left. Wake only felt that her eyes, her words, were more offensive than any weapon on this ship. It could easily break his defenses. She held his hand. So, I choose you. When she said this, she couldn't help but smile. No, I didn't have a choice at all. You were my favorite from the beginning, my first favorite was you, my second favorite was also you. I chose and chose, it was you. Wake stared at her blankly, his heart was finally cut open by her words. His bitter heart was filled with her sweet words. Sour, sweet, everything. He didn't know how to react at all. His eyes gradually became lighter, the ice blue pupils returned, and his hair began to turn golden. Under the sun, he was so exquisite that people thought they were looking at the sea god. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 85. A man and a fish looked at each other. It was like an incomparably beautiful picture that people couldn't bear to break. Chinemo was speechless for a while, feeling that his mouth was full of bitter dog food. He took a deep breath and finally remembered his duty, attack this mermaid for me, and this woman who betrayed humanity. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she was so scared that she threw herself into Wake's arms. Let's run, Wake. This was such a warm word. Wake hugged her and immediately plunged into the sea. The sea happily fluctuated, the seagulls flew around, they were all happy for the mermaid. The people on the side immediately shouted, fire the cannons, there's also a barbed mermaid net, get them ready. Chinemo immediately ran back and kicked the soldier away. He shouted, who told you to fire the cannons? Do you know how dangerous it is? A barbed net, don't you know that this thing is poisonous and can stab people to death? Do you have a brain? Just shout a few times and it'll be fine. Why are you doing it for real? After being kicked in the butt, the soldier asked in fear, why are you crying? Chen Mo's face was full of tears. He rolled up his sleeves and started to beat him to death. I'm not crying. The sea breeze got into my eyes. It's salty. How could she choose a mermaid? Chenemo was reminded of the time when she jumped into the sea for the mermaid without any fear of death. So from that moment on, he knew that she had really fallen in love with that fish. Wake jumped into the sea with her in his arms and plunged straight into the sea. He held her in his arms and didn't say anything. His golden hair floated in the sea. A huge school of fish swam past him. Wake suddenly said, did you really choose me? Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before nodding gently. I've always chosen you. I saw you being born with my own eyes and watched you grow up with my own eyes. I've never thought of betraying you. Vic really wanted to ask, what about last time? Why did he take the mermaid's heart and run away? Wei Wei Bai seemed to know his concerns. She sighed. Because the mermaid's heart has a secret. It seems to be about mermaids. I read in ancient mermaid books that the mermaid's heart will bring disaster to the king of mermaids. I don't want you to be hurt. Wake persistently asked, what hurt? Wei Wei Bai hesitated. If you fall in love with a human, you will die. Wake stopped swimming, his expression froze for a moment. Wei Wei Bai immediately said, at that time I remembered that information. That's why I took the mermaid's heart and ran away. I want to take it and study it. Collect below to record this reading record. Chapter 701. Wake stared at her blankly. So you left me because you were afraid that I would die. Wei Wei Bai smiled bitterly. I was afraid that you would die if you fell in love with me, so I left you. Wake, then you're not afraid that I will die now? Wei Wei Bai shook her head. After researching, I found that the information was fake. The mermaid's heart does have a secret, but the secret is that if a human falls in love with a mermaid, then they can see her love through the mermaid's heart. Speaking of this, Wei Wei Bai couldn't help looking up at him. In the water, she had a soft smile, without a trace of seriousness, and her black hair gently fluttered. Clean and beautiful. So I came back, Wake. I don't want to cause you any harm, so I ask you to forgive me for leaving without saying goodbye. Wake suddenly let go of her and stepped aside. His ice blue eyes were filled with complex emotions. He said, "You know what? The day you left was enough to take my life. You didn't need that fake information to torture me. I could have died." Wei Wei Bai's smile gradually disappeared. "I'm sorry," Wake said fiercely. "What's the use of being sorry? I feel so uncomfortable that I want to kill all humans. You come and go as you please, you don't care about me at all." Wei Wei Bai quickly said, "I care about you very much." Wake shouted, "Liar, you are a big human liar." Wei Wei Bai said, "I won't do it next time." Wake said angrily, "You have a next time. What can't you say to me? I would rather be loved by you and die than be abandoned by you and live in pain." Wei Wei Bai swam over and wanted to hug him. "Wake, I made you sad." Wake dodged and twisted his neck, coldly saying, "Don't think that this will make me forgive you, I'm still angry." With that, he plunged into the huge school of fish. He made trouble in the school of fish, scaring them away in panic. But he couldn't help showing a happy smile when he was in a place she couldn't see. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 90. Among the fish, his golden hair stood out like the most beautiful scenery in the blue sea. Bai Weiwei was in the water, looking at him with a few traces of indulgence. "Tongzi, mermaids are quite pretty too." The system asked, "So?" Weiwei Bai, "If only I could raise one in real life." The system shuddered. "I can't take it away." Weiwei Bai was a little disappointed. The system comforted him, "What's the use of being pretty? Crucian carps can be used to make soup. Human flesh isn't tasty, there are too many bones, and the meat is too dry. It's better to raise a few grass carps, which can be fried and eaten with rice." Weiwei Bai, "It sounds very reasonable." Wait a minute, did she say she was going to feed it? Although Wake said that he wouldn't forgive her, he couldn't bear to take her to the deep sea cave 30,000 meters below the sea and lock her up. Instead, they were brought back to the base camp of the merfolk, the merfolk city. When the merfolk saw her, they were all surprised. Merfolk who were betrayed would kill the betrayer, this was something that almost all merfolk would do. But she was alive and well. This made all the malicious gazes turn to surprise, and then they looked at their king. Wake saw them and snorted coldly. The king's threat made all the merfolk tremble, and all their thoughts disappeared. Wake had a palace, where the kings of the past lived. As soon as Weiwei Bai entered, she was almost blinded by the jewels and decorative sea products inside. Wake calculated the time and found that the effect of the pearls was about to expire. He gave her another one and told her to eat it. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, /transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here, / transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Download Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here to read on mobile. Transmigration system, Prince Charming, come here. Chapter 702. Humans couldn't live long in the sea. These pearls couldn't be eaten frequently. Wake's heart tightened, but his expression remained calm. He thought of the mermaid's heart, which could turn her into a mermaid. But the last betrayal left a shadow in his heart. When he thought of Wei Wei by getting the mermaid's heart and making a wish, she might make a wish that would make him sad. He didn't dare to give it to her. Wei Wei Bai squatted down curiously and picked up a big conch. A beautiful ruby fell out of it. This mermaid was like a dragon. They all liked these shiny things. In the mermaid palace, a group of mermaids gathered at some point. The mermaid nobles were in front. "Your Majesty, we request to send the human out of the sea." Because she was the person His Majesty loved, they didn't dare to shout and kill. They could only leave, feeling wronged. Wake glanced outside indifferent. The noble mermaid continued to ask, "Your Majesty, the human betrayed you, how can you treat her like this?" The human who betrayed the mermaids was still alive. And she continued to receive the protection of the Mermaid King. This had angered the entire mermaid community. Wake suddenly took Wei Wei Bai's hand and said softly, let's go and see." Wei Wei Bai let go of the conch and followed him out. There was a group of colorful mermaids outside, and when they saw her, their eyes became fierce. What a strong murderous aura. Wei Wei Bai felt like she was facing thousands of carnivores. Noticing that her fingers were trembling, Wake pulled her behind him, shielding her from the mermaid's ferocious eyes. His eyes coldly swept over all the mermaids, and he said coldly, "From today on, she is my wife, and whoever disrespects her is offending me." These words were too heavy. All the mermaids didn't know how to protest. This didn't give them a chance to protest at all. The oldest noble mermaid swam out. His face was old, and his eyes were full of wisdom. "Your Majesty, you are young after all. If it's because of love, it doesn't matter even if it's a human, but the premise is that you love each other." This mermaid was very prestigious. Wake's tone was not so cold. He lowered his head and looked at Wei Wei Bai, his eyes gentle. "We love each other." The deep affection in these words simply gave people goosebumps. The old merman sighed softly. "But she betrayed you and our mermaid race. We can't believe in her love." "Yes, how can we believe in human love? Humans are the best at deceiving people. They are dirty, cunning, and ugly. Your Majesty, don't be fooled. This human doesn't love you." As soon as the old merman said this, a bunch of mermaids echoed in agreement. She couldn't wait to tear Wei Wei Bai into pieces. Wake's eyes turned fierce. "Shut up." This threat directly shook his brain. Dozens of mermaids at the scene immediately vomited, completely unable to bear the power of this command. The remaining mermaids all turned pale. When the king showed his might, none of the mermaids could resist. Wei Wei Bai frowned, her fingers clenching him tightly. Wake's ice blue eyes looked at the mermaids in front of him arrogantly and indifferently, and said to them word by word, "My wife, how can you talk about her?" The mermaids looked sadly at their king. They couldn't resist, and they were suppressing their resentment. The atmosphere was very bad. Wei Wei Bai suddenly pulled his finger. "Wake, do you remember that the mermaid's heart can detect the secret of human love?" Wake bowed his head sideways, there was a trace of disapproval in his eyes, but more curiosity. Could the mermaid's heart really see the human heart? Wei Wei Bai looked at the oldest mermaid and said to him, "You know the secret of the mermaid's heart." The old mermaid's eyes were still, but with a trace of compassion. "Yes, I know." This old mermaid actually knew the secret of the mermaid's heart. He didn't say it because Wake fell in love with a human. He was too disappointed, so if Wake finally died because of a human, it would be good. There was no need to implicate the mermaid family. Wei Wei Bai then said, "The secret of the mermaid's heart is that it can detect whether a human is in love with a mermaid." The old mermaid frowned. How could the secret be this? Stupid humans really only knew how to talk nonsense. But he didn't want the secret to be leaked out. After all, Wake was really not his ideal ruler, and it was better for him to die. He had to nod. He was the most prestigious mermaid in the mermaid family. If he nodded, everyone would believe him. After Wei Wei Bai saw his approval, she raised her head, her eyes clear and firm. Wake, let me test it, and let the mermaid's heart tell you whether I love you or not. Comma. Chapter 703. Wake took her hand, and his blue eyes were tinged with some gold. This was the color of his emotional state. He looked at the mere people indifferently and sharply, and then looked at Wei Wei Bai softly. His thin lips opened slightly, and his voice was very cold. I don't agree. After that, he seemed to feel that his tone was too heavy. He glanced at her and found that she was not angry, so he softened his voice and said, whether you love me or not, I have my own feelings. I don't need the mermaid's heart. Wei Wei Bai's smiling face remained unchanged, and she insisted, but I want everyone to witness my love for you. Her smile was always gentle and comforting. But this time, her smile was a little different. Wake couldn't tell what was different. Maybe her expression was more natural. Wake's fingers couldn't help but go deeper, grabbing her fingers. When his fingers were intertwined, he could feel the warmth of her skin more. This made him feel closer to her. Wake still had a shadow in his heart about the mermaid's heart. His tone tightened, aren't you going to run? Wei Wei Bai said with some embarrassment, even if I want to run, I have nowhere to go. I am now a wanted criminal on land who colluded with the mere people. Wake became fierce, you really want to run, and what do you mean by a wanted criminal who colluded with the mere people? It should be said that you are a wanted criminal who fell in love with the mere people. This is shameless. How cute. Wei Wei Bai's smile couldn't help but deepen, then do you dare to let me test my love for you? I'm also very curious if I really fell in love with you. After all, humans are very fickle. When Wake heard this, his eyes instantly turned golden. He gritted his teeth and said in a heavier tone, you love me, I know. After that, he picked her up and directly summoned the whale. Then he turned back to those damn mere people and said, follow me if you want to witness our love. After that, he swam to the back of the whale, and the whale immediately went to the eye of the sea. The group of mere people behind also followed with seahorses, octopuses, and dolphins. Wake's face was cold, and his cold eyes glared fiercely at the group of mere people behind him. Don't pay attention to their gossip. They're just a bunch of single fishes who can't find a partner. They're jealous of us. Because mermaids were sentient creatures, they were very cautious about their feelings. Therefore, it was very difficult to find a compatible partner. A mermaid like Vic, who had just reached adulthood, could find a life partner he recognized at once. He was very lucky. The whale came to the eye of the sea again. Vic's strength was so great that he could stand beside the sea eye and replace it. He stretched out his finger and the mermaid's heart came into his hand. Wei Wei Bai saw the mermaid's heart in his hand and was about to take it. The system said, let's wait for another 24 hours. After 24 hours, one of the items that can deceive the mermaid's heart will be on sale. Wei Wei Bai's fingers paused as she looked up at Wake. She found him gazing at her quietly. Her eyes were focused, soft, and full of love. His delicate face, set off by his blonde hair, was so beautiful that it could touch anyone's heart. Wei Wei Bai stared blankly. She suddenly whispered to the system, I always feel like I've seen him somewhere. After the shield was turned off, many small feelings came out. For example, this inexplicable sense of familiarity. So familiar that it made her mood fluctuate. Chapter 704. System, the plane is randomly issued, and the characters in the plane are also random. Maybe it's because all the beautiful men look the same, so you think he's familiar. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment before saying, "I'll try." With the current increase in favorability, not to mention 24 hours, it was possible to reach 95 in the next second. Wei Wei Bai stretched out her hands and took the mermaid's heart. The light of the mermaid's heart, on her delicate fingers, was beautiful and translucent. Wei Wei Bai held the mermaid's heart and looked at Wake, who was beginning to get nervous. His face was calm, but his muscles were unusually tight. It seemed that if she dared to say anything about her wish to escape, he would snatch the mermaid's heart at once. Wei Wei Bai showed him a gentle smile. "Don't be nervous, look." After she finished, she held the mermaid's heart. The light of the mermaid's heart began to change color. The cold blue slowly turned pink. What a romantic mermaid's heart. Love could actually be distinguished by color. Wei Wei Bai's face looked more gentle under the light of the mermaid's heart. "Wake, the color of the mermaid's heart has changed." Wake looked at the mermaid's heart. He stared blankly, his thick eyelashes half covering his eyes, looking very silly. His heart was beating fast. So fast that it made his scalp numb. This was not his own reaction, but the power of the mermaid's heart. After the mermaid's heart tested her love, it told Wake. She loved him. This power was so amazing and warm. Wake was stunned, he didn't know how to react. Joy, excitement, or anything else, all the words that could express his happiness were pale and powerless. He suddenly noticed that something had fallen from his eyes. It was a pearl. No, it was a tear. Blue pearls of tears fell from his eyes. Tears of joy. Wake quickly reached out and covered his eyes, suppressing his excitement. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 95. Countdown to entering the curse of the mermaid's heart. 95 was when he completely fell in love with her. It was also when the mermaid's heart began to curse the mermaid king. Wei Wei Bai received a pearl in her hand. There was a trace of sadness in her eyes, but more importantly, there was a kind of relief. She whispered, "Vic." Wake cried because of this, which was a very shameful thing for the merfolk. Therefore, he didn't dare to look at Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai repeated, "Wake." Wake finally turned his face around. Instead, he became reserved. "Yes, what's wrong?" Wei Wei Bai revealed a bright smile. "Nothing. I just suddenly wanted to call you a few more times. I was afraid that I would forget you." Vic said, "Idiot, we've always been together. There's no need to forget." When he said this, the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curve upwards, and his eyes were especially bright and adorable. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything more. The color of the mermaid's heart in her hand began to change. A pink heart was the heart of a fish lover. This love might not necessarily be heavy. Even if it was just a momentary liking or a few traces of sincere love. It was enough to make the mermaid's heart admit that this human fell in love with the merfolk. It was enough for her to sacrifice. Wake saw that the mermaid's heart had changed color. It was black. The warm love just now seemed to be nibbled away by something. The old noble merfolk also saw it. He sighed. It turned out that this human deliberately said that she wanted to test her love to sacrifice herself. Once the mermaid's heart turned black, it represented the beginning of the sacrifice. No one could stop it. Wake's face changed greatly, and he reached out to grab the mermaid's heart in Wei Wei Bai's hand. Wei Wei Bai's face began to pale, and her skin began to lose its luster. Chapter 705. It seems that something terrible has been swallowing her vitality. Wake hurriedly hugged her, his body trembling. Wei Wei. Wei Wei. What's wrong with you? Wei Wei Bai reluctantly showed a few traces of a smile, nothing. Wake reached out and touched her skin, it was like ice. His fingers trembled, and he could barely hold her. His voice became sharp, "Are you sick? Let's go find the dark wizard." Wei Wei Bai could clearly feel the loss of her vitality. It didn't hurt, but it didn't feel good either. Her mind began to slack, and Wake's face slowly blurred in front of her. Wake immediately bit off the blood vessels in his wrist, and the mermaid's blood continued to pour into Wei Wei Bai's mouth. "Wei Wei, drink more, this can cure the disease. The mermaid's saliva can heal wounds, and the mermaid's blood can strengthen the human body to achieve the effect of curing diseases." Wei Wei Bai smiled helplessly, her voice was weak and hoarse. "Don't hurt yourself, you were created by me, and you are the only hope in my world, the only person who can be happy." She weakly reached out and touched his cheek. "I'm fine, I'll be fine after a sleep." The whale quickly rushed to the location of the dark wizard. Wake looked at her increasingly haggard appearance and panicked. She looked like something terrible had been depriving her of her life. The old noble mermaid behind him desperately rushed over. "Your Majesty, put the mermaid's heart back, the earthquake in the sea has begun." Wake held the blackened mermaid's heart in his hand. He was also far away from the eye of the sea, so the earthquake began. Wake didn't listen, his mind was now full of her gradually losing her vitality, and he kept feeding her the mermaid's blood. He kept saying, "Don't sleep, Wei Wei, wake up." The old mermaid finally caught up. "Your Majesty, you can't save her, she voluntarily sacrificed herself to the mermaid's heart, otherwise the one who died would be you." The blue in Wake's eyes turned golden, and even brought out a bloody red. He angrily shouted, get out of here." Old Merman was almost shocked to death by this order. He quickly said in a trembling voice, "The heart of the mermaid is a curse on the Mermaid King. If you fall in love with a human, you will die because of the curse, unless the human is willing to love you and is willing to sacrifice her life to resolve the curse on you." Wake turned around and looked at him fiercely. "Those who lie to the king, die." After this order, the old merman showed a sad expression, but he was not affected. He wasn't lying. Therefore, this order had no effect at all. Wake's ferocious expression slowly changed. Suddenly, her fingers gently gripped his hand as a weak and hoarse voice sounded. Wake quickly turned around and saw that her face had decayed to a terrible extent. Mermaids had always been creatures that liked beautiful things. But at this moment, he didn't think she was ugly at all. Instead, he held her face and said, "Wei Wei, it's okay. It'll be fine soon." Wei Wei Bai's body was so weak that it could die at any time. But her eyes were very clear. She said, "Kiss me." Wake froze, then somewhat clumsily lowered his head and kissed her lips. Her lips were dry and no longer soft. But Wake seemed to be kissing the most beautiful spring water. Gentle and affectionate. Ding, the male lead's favorability is 100. The host's mission is complete. Prepare to leave the plane, successful departure. Wake's fingers that touched her face suddenly became empty. The cold ashes drifted away between his slender fingers. Slash. Chapter 706. What his lips touched was no longer her lips, but empty air. Her body, lying in his arms, dissipated. Wake slowly opened his eyes were blank. He maintained the position of holding her, motionless. His hands and legs were full of her ashes that turned into sand after all her life was taken away. The sea moved, and the ashes began to drift away. Wake hurriedly reached out to grab, and while grabbing, he screamed with a sharp voice. He couldn't even hear what he was shouting, he was crying like crazy. It was a heart-wrenching pain. The mermaid's singing voice turned into a tragic howl at this time. The ashes in his fingers drifted away, he couldn't keep her. She had been lying to him, she said the secret of the mermaid's heart was just to test love. Liars, humans are all liars. Wake's hand tightly clenched the remaining ashes of her body, he held it hysterically. You lied to me, you've been lying to me. Red blood tears flowed out of his eyes. The blood tears turned into pearls, falling down one by one. When Wei Wei Bai woke up, her whole body was in a trance. She had never woken up so tired and powerless. Sitting on the hospital bed, she stared blankly at the white wall, and suddenly said, "What do you think will happen to Wake? If she died, that mentally retarded fish would be miserable." The system hesitated. Maybe, probably, after crying, he'll go find a new lover. After all, your face is ugly, your body is flat, and you don't have a tail. He might have already disliked you, his first love, and have another big mermaid as his wife. Wei Wei Bai was silent for a while, and then said with a sigh of relief, "So it's like that." The system immediately nodded, "That's right, there's no such thing as an undying love, it's all over after a while, and then you'll go live your own beautiful life." Without blocking feelings, the system was afraid of emotional repercussions. Wei Wei Bai thought about it, and nodded normally, "That's good." The system was relieved, as long as nothing happened, it was good. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, 3 restrained knocks, and then waited for a while. Seeing that no one answered, the door opened. Wei Wei Bai looked up and saw Yi Yuxuan walking in. His slender body was dressed in a fitting black suit. His short hair was so clean that it seemed to have a halo dancing on it. His beautiful black eyes were deep and calm. He looked up and saw Wei Wei Bai sitting on the bed. She stared at him blankly. Her legs were placed under the bed, and her beautiful ankles were so fragile that they looked like they would break with a single pinch. Yi Yuxuan's eyes flashed with a light of forbearance. He walked over and carefully reached out to hug her. Wei Wei Bai seemed to have just noticed him. She suddenly reached out and hugged his thin waist. The side of her face was pressed against his suit. Yi Yuxuan's body stiffened, but she didn't dare to move. She didn't say anything and just hugged him quietly. Her delicate arms, her clean side profile, and the strength she used to hug him tightly. It made Yi Yuxuan's heart beat faster, and even her breathing became irregular. Wei Wei Bai didn't know what was wrong with her. When she woke up for the first time, she was very tired. So tired that it was scary. She was even at a loss. She couldn't be like before, and forget the intense scenes in the previous world when she woke up. Instead, she kept recalling Wake's last face. The kiss he gave her. When she finally closed her eyes, he still had an ignorant expression. Was this the after effect of not shielding her feelings? Wei Wei Bai suddenly knew that the emotion shield was an awesome cheat. Humans couldn't split their feelings multiple times to attack different people. Every time she woke up like this, she would go crazy after a few worlds. Wei Wei Bai suddenly said softly, "Sorry, I will pay for your clothes." After saying that, tears suddenly came out. Chapter 707. He didn't know where this familiar feeling came from. After Wei Wei Bai finished crying, she pulled on the corner of his suit as if nothing had happened and elegantly wiped her tears. The system saw that she had calmed down and softly reminded her of her remaining life points. Host's mission is complete. Obtained 30 days of life points, a total of 160 life points. Deducting the system's instant noodles, buy one get one free, a total of 4 bags of 6 days of life points, a total of 154 days of life points. The system said, your current body's capacity for external life points is about 300 days. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she finally pulled back a bit of rationality. She was just about to let go of his waist and leave, but a large hand pressed down on her head and pressed her back against his clothes. Wei Wei Bai's face was tightly pressed against his chest. She could faintly hear his heart beating in his chest. He didn't say anything. He just pressed on her and didn't want her to leave. It was as if her rare dependence had made him addicted. Wei Wei Bai just remembered that her life points would be taken away. Her brain couldn't think of a good way to seduce him at the moment. She was afraid that Yi Yuxuan would calm down. Her life points would be taken away. What she was afraid of really happened. She was just worried when she heard the system's notification sound. Life points, 155, 56, 57. Wei Wei Bai at first thought that her life points were decreasing, but it turned out that it was increasing. She looked up blankly and saw his beautiful jaw and his half-closed black eyes. He stared at her calmly and attentively. This kind of gaze made people feel calm and steady. There was no feeling of excitement at all. But her life points kept on increasing. Wei Wei Bai knew that if it wasn't for the extreme emotional fluctuations, her life points wouldn't increase so easily. Her fingers couldn't help but lightly pinch the muscles of his waist. Yi Yuxuan didn't move, and his muscles only tensed up a little. But her life points increased by 5 days. Wei Wei Bai pinched again, and her life points increased by 1 day. Pinch, it's not rising again. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but look up at him. His eyes were silent and complicated as he looked back at her. His eyes contained traces of vicissitudes and sadness. Yi Yuxuan slowly bent down and reached out a finger to gently touch her cheek. His fingertips were as gentle as the air as they gently touched her soft cheeks. He suddenly revealed a smile. His usually cold and emotionless face suddenly seemed to have a life of its own, making people unable to take their eyes off him. No matter how many years it takes, as long as I can wait for you, it's worth it. Those long and painful dreams. Every torture could make people break down. But when he knocked on the door and saw her sitting on the hospital bed, alive and well, looking at him with a pair of bright and clear eyes, he also felt that he was very lucky. It was all a dream. But she was real. She had always been there. Hello, Your Majesty Mermaid. Follow-up. The ferocious and violent period of the ocean was finally over. The humans and all the merfolk breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. This ocean riot, hurricanes, high waves, and underwater earthquakes affected the land as well. It lasted for a full 10 years. All the merfolk and humans thought that they were facing the end of the world. This was just the most powerful mermaid king in history. Because of the painful loss of his partner, it produced a fluctuation of power. Because this mermaid went crazy for 10 years, it also caused the world to be in turmoil for 10 years. 10 years later, everything returned to peace. The crazy Vic finally seemed to return to normal. Slash. Chapter 708. His golden hair turned completely red, and his golden eyes turned a rich black. His fishtail was a beautiful golden blue, and like his hair, it turned a deep red. It was full of an ominous aura. This was the color that mermaids would change when they lost all hope and were no longer happy. He crushed the heart of the mermaid that killed Wei Wei Bai, and left many of his more powerful scales in the eye of the sea. He suppressed the earthquake at the bottom of the sea. Sea cities began to be built, and humans could also sail on the sea. Everything began to return to order. Wake didn't commit suicide, nor did he howl in grief. He was very calm, like a set-up machine. He began to maintain the relationship between humans and mermaids. He remembered that Wei Wei said that she liked mermaids since she was very young. She was a human, but because she liked mermaids, she became a wanted criminal. She also said that her greatest hope was to make him happy. He remembered everything she said. His happiness was all because of her. She had used her own life to exchange for his life. So how dare he die and waste what she gave him? Wake was calm, restrained, and began to promote the law of friendly relations between humans and mermaids by hook or by crook. This kind of thing was not easy. But for him, only by forcing himself to the most tragic state could he get a little rest. As soon as he stopped, his mind was full of the image of Weiwei dying in his arms. Humans and mermaids began to trade. There were also mermaid markets on land, and humans began to shop and travel in the sea. Chinamo had met him once during this period. A man and a merman both had cold faces. It was as if they would attack each other at any time. But the two of them quickly signed their names on the agreement to promote the relationship between humans and mermaids. Chinamo was already a senior official of the empire. As the most powerful person, he publicly supported the relationship between humans and mermaids. When Wake passed by him, Chinamo gritted his teeth and said, "If it weren't for her, you would have become sashimi." Wake was neither sad nor happy, and didn't even look at him. He just left. After many years, mermaids and humans forgot their hatred. Both the sea and the land were free to come and go. Everyone knew that there was a person called Weiwei Bai who was the greatest person of that era. Many of her genetic research papers were translated and circulated around the world. She became a textbook regular. She was kind, beautiful, and talented. All the best words to describe her were not enough. Even humans and mermaids could get along so well. It was also because of her contribution that it was possible. These promotions came from Vic. He had been Weiwei Bai's promoter all his life. All the good things that he had done, all the great things that he had done, were all given to Weiwei Bai. Vic was still the cold and unhappy mermaid. When he started to grow old, he liked to sit in the mermaid square. She listened to the other children discussing the Weiwei Bai in the textbooks. Or perhaps the statue of Weiwei Bai in the middle of the square was like an angel. He remembered everything she said. She liked mermaids, so he treated mermaids well. She was a human and longed for humans and mermaids to get along well. And he had done it. He tried his best to promote the various achievements of her research during her lifetime. Everything was just because this was what she liked. Yes, he got the life she gave him. He didn't dare to squander it. Therefore, he used up all of his life to live the life she wanted him to live. He did what she liked. Read at https://www.sashu.com. Read the at https://m.sashu.com collections below to record the reading record of this time. Chapter 708 Reality 2. The Chapter 709. All his life, he had been imitating what she wanted, the path she wanted to take. He tried his best to chase after her disappearing footsteps. He didn't even know how long he had lived. Chinamo had been dead for many years, but he was still alive. Sometimes Wake even envied Chinamo. The sooner he could get rid of this kind of life, the sooner he could see her. When Wake was dying, he suddenly saw that scene. Weiwei Bai reached out, took his hand, and said with a smile, "It's okay, you won't fall, I'll support you." Her voice was so warm, and her smile was so beautiful. Wake came to his senses. He had been stumbling all his life. He had lost the girl who had been holding his hand and walking with him. Wake slowly closed his eyes, but his fingers suddenly stretched out. It seemed that he wanted to hold someone's hand and listen to someone tell him, "It's okay, he won't fall." Then slowly, his fingers began to turn into foam. His body also began to turn into foam. He drifted away, and in the end, only an ice blue bead was left. This was the new mermaid's heart. But it was different from the previous mermaid's heart. This heart was full of love, there was no curse, and it would not suck other people's lives. This heart loved a human for many years. In the end, it broke the cycle of the curse, leaving only pure beauty. Yi Yuxuan looked at her confused eyes. He didn't explain, just bowed his head and kissed her. The kiss was incredibly gentle. It was like the caress of the sea. Wei Wei Bai only felt his fresh breath on her lips, and the moist coolness. She had some intense emotions, but she slowly calmed down. Yi Yuxuan kissed her lips little by little, tracing the line of her lips with incredible strength. And the life value was still steadily and persistently rising. It was so calm and gentle. But his heart was as fierce as a storm. After the kiss was over, Yi Yuxuan gasped softly and said, "Do you know where I just went?" Wei Wei Bai was a little dazed by the kiss. She was also baffled by the continuous increase in her HP. Her rhythm was almost messed up by Yi Yuxuan, so she could only shake her head blankly. Yi Yuxuan's calm eyes rippled with gentleness. "I'm going to try on the engagement dress." Engaged? Weren't they already engaged? Wei Wei Bai asked in confusion. Engagement. Yi Yuxuan had already answered, the engagement ceremony last time was too simple. Everyone felt that the engagement ceremony was too rushed. "We have to do it again. I wanted to get married." However, Bai Changyan said that there was not enough time. Furthermore, Wei Wei Bai had been in a deep sleep with a strange illness. Only then did it change to engagement. Wei Wei Bai recalled the engagement ceremony last time. In fact, there wasn't much of an occasion. The two of them did not meet at all. Yi Yuxuan coldly signed the engagement agreement, threw it on the table, and went to work. A few minutes later, Wei Wei Bai saw the agreement on the table. She also signed it expressionlessly and went to work. They were such an unmarried couple who loved to work. No way. They clearly didn't care about each other. What happened to make Yi Yuxuan, who didn't care about her at all before, change so much? Could it be that every time she flirted with him for a few minutes, it finally activated this robot completely? Yi Yuxuan saw that she was in a daze. He couldn't help but reach out and carry her. "You should try on the dress too." Wei Wei Bai hurriedly stopped him. "Aren't you afraid that I'll be in a coma during the engagement ceremony?" /to TXT download. Chapter 710. Yi Yuxuan's eyelashes drooped slightly as he looked at her calmly. "You always sleep for 3 days before waking up. The longest time you take to wake up is no more than half a day, and the shortest time is a few minutes. Almost no experts can explain this illness." Wei Wei Bai, of course it can't be explained. The existence of the system itself is a cheat beyond anyone's imagination. Even if it's a rubbish cheat, it's still a cheat. Yi Yuxuan carried her out of the door and said calmly as he walked, "So in the future, your illness may worsen or recover. No one can guarantee it." Wei Wei Bai glanced at him and realized that he was walking towards the entrance of the hospital. But he still said softly, "So I won't wait for an uncertain thing." When he said this, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. They stood at the entrance of the hospital. The sunlight shone in, making his face even more handsome. The expression on his face became firm and serious. "It doesn't matter if you recover or worsen. It doesn't matter to me. It's enough that you're always by my side. Even if you sleep for the rest of your life, I can watch over you for the rest of your life." At least she was still alive. She was still within his reach. This was already the greatest mercy he could offer. Only people who had lost too many times knew what true pain was. It was when you thought that you could endure any kind of suffering for her. No matter what she became, he could watch over her and not change his heart. You just realized. You don't even have the right to watch over her. Because she's dead. She's gone too far. There's no turning back. When Wei Wei Bai heard this, she couldn't describe what she felt. Was it an itch? Was it the feeling of a feather? Or was it the feeling of a warm breeze? She didn't think too deeply about it. Her life points were still rising slowly. She only felt that this sentence was especially warm. Especially when a man said this to a woman, it was simply touching her heart. Yi Yuxuan brought Wei Wei Bai to a small shop beside the hospital. The small shop was located in an ancient alley. It was very quiet and very clean. There was only an old tailor there. The old tailor sees Yi Yuxuan coming in with Wei Wei Bai in her arms. He smiles and says, "Are you here to make clothes for the bride?" Yi Yuxuan said calmly, "She will be my wife. You can tailor a dress for her engagement. If she likes it, she will come to our wedding in the future." When Bai Weiwei heard him very naturally introduce her as his wife, her heart couldn't help but skip a few beats. He couldn't wait to write it down on paper. His tone, his actions, and his expression when he said those words. She was teased to the point where her maiden heart was about to burst. If it weren't for her thick skin, others would have seen her blush. Yi Yuxuan placed Wei Wei Bai on a stool and said to her, "Take a seat." After saying that, he walked with steady steps to the side where the tea was placed. Her current condition wasn't suitable for drinking this kind of tea. Yi Yuxuan opened the cabinet under the tea with a natural expression. There were all kinds of things that could be made into drinks. Yi Yuxuan expressionlessly took out a packet of brewed drinks that could warm the body and the stomach. Then he rolled up his sleeves, revealing his beautiful wrist and the simple line of the watch on his wrist. He turned his face to the side and began to brew the drinks smoothly. The old tailor called his wife over. "Measure this young lady's body size." The old man pulled Wei Wei Bai up and said with a smile, "Measure this young lady. Make a beautiful and appropriate dress. You will be happy for a lifetime." Wei Wei Bai couldn't keep up with the pace. Even if they were engaged, she thought that Yi Yuxuan would hire a high-end designer. Or buy it from a super big wedding dress shop. She couldn't reject the old man who was smiling so brightly, so she stood obediently and measured him. After the old man was done measuring, he patted Wei Wei Bai's firm buttocks. "Young lady, you're growing well here. Good fertility." Wei Wei Bai's mouth twitched. Good fertility. Yi Yuxuan, who had just finished brewing the drinks, froze. Then he turned around and saw the experienced hand on Wei Wei Bai's buttocks. His expression immediately darkened. Chapter 711. Yi Yuxuan walked quickly and came to Wei Wei Bai's side in an instant. He pulled her behind him with a cold face. He looked at the tailor's wife with a gloomy gaze. "I asked you to take the measurements, not to let you touch my wife with your old, wrinkled, and ugly hand." Because they were both women and an old woman, Wei Wei Bai didn't think much of it. But Yi Yuxuan's expression was similar to catching an adulterer. The old woman's smile froze, and she was about to say something. The old tailor had already walked over. He bowed respectfully to Wei Wei Bai. "This is my wife's negligence. Please forgive her." This old couple added up to 150 years old. No matter how thick-skinned Wei Wei Bai was, she knew how to respect her elders. She quickly returned the greeting. "No, this mother-in-law didn't do anything. She was just praising me out of goodwill. The old woman said to give birth well. It was just a formality out of habit." The old woman also came forward to apologize. The scene was very harmonious. Wei Wei Bai's face froze from smiling. Yi Yuxuan's face was still cold, and his gaze was extremely gloomy. It was as if he was the one who had his butt touched. Wei Wei Bai didn't know why, but her hand patted his butt, and her palm shook slightly. Damn, this feeling. His body was so well-proportioned and strong. She said calmly, "You're also good-looking and giving birth well. So isn't there another similarity between the two of us?" Yi Yuxuan turned to look at her. His expression was a little complicated, but at least it wasn't as gloomy. He brought the hot drink over and handed it to her. "Drink something. We'll go back to the hospital later to check your body condition." Wei Wei Bai held the hot drink. It seemed to be a Chinese medicine drink, but it was sweet when she took a sip. She felt that Yi Yuxuan was very familiar with this place. Yi Yuxuan sat beside her. Sitting on the long stool, he was tall and sturdy. He sat next to her, taller than her by more than a head. The old tailor brought the cloth over. Yi Yuxuan cautiously took the cloth and the album. Then he explained the cloth to Wei Wei Bai. Yi Yuxuan's face was expressionless. She leaned sideways and lowered her head. She flipped open the album with a small piece of cloth beside her hand. Speaking of a fabric, he flipped through the album to show her the final result. Wei Wei Bai listened, but her attention was slowly drawn to his face. The store was made of wood, so more sunlight came in. He turned his face to the side and spoke to her seriously in a low voice. Even though he was expressionless, he still appeared very gentle. In Bai Weiwei's emotionless eyes, there was a glimmer of light. His voice was the only thing that could be heard in the quiet atmosphere of the warm store. It was rare that he didn't think of the strategy, nor did he think of his pitiful life. He even forgot about the anxiety in his heart. Wei Wei Bai looked at him quietly. Yi Yuxuan stared at the album, but his ears were a little hot because of her gaze. The pain of those dreams was soothed by her gaze. He felt a completely different emotion. It was peaceful and pleasant. The frozen calm turned into a warm spring. It wasn't intense and there were no ups and downs. After Yi Yuxuan finished explaining the cloth, he automatically changed the topic. He had never experienced such a thing. The conversation should have ended, but he still wanted to say some nonsense to delay the time. He just didn't want to let this time pass so easily. This old tailor is a clothing designer who has served the Yi family for 40 years. He closed the album and said, "It's very safe here. Don't worry about him being bought." Wei Wei Bai finished her drink and glanced at the tailor who was changing the clothes. Yi Yuxuan continued, after he retired, he opened a small store. He was sheltered by the Yi family and lived a stable life. Wei Wei Bai, you did a good job. Arranging a place for a retired worker can buy people's hearts and make the people who are working feel at ease. Hearing the praise, Yi Yuxuan's eyes lit up. The corners of his mouth curled up, then he closed it again. The material and color of the dress have been roughly decided. I'll let him choose. With that, he stood up and took the empty cup in her hand. Slash button at the bottom to record the reading record. The Chapter 7:12. Then he turned around and walked to the tea area, poured another cup of hot drink, and walked back to put it in her hand. His fingers lightly touched her fingertips. Because of this small contact, both of them were stunned for a moment. Then the two of them calmly left. Yi Yuxuan turned around and walked to the old tailor, took out the cloth he had just chosen and ordered him something. Wei Wei Bai put the drink on the stool, and looked at Yi Yuxuan's back in a rare relaxed manner. The system's voice suddenly sounded, the external life value has reached 300 days, it has reached the upper limit, it cannot be increased. Wei Wei Bai said softly, how much life value do I have now? The system, 300 days external, 24 days system reward, a total of 324 days. Wei Wei Bai, less than a year of life. This was the day she obtained the most life value after transmigrating for so long. But at the same time, she knew a life less than a year was very short. Wei Wei Bai looked at Yi Yuxuan's slender and strong figure and sighed, "Activate the newbie gift pack, I want to go to the next dimension." The system, Yi Yuxuan's emotions are still in a state of rising, it will not affect your life value, you can rest before continuing to transmigrate. Wei Wei Bai slowly closed her eyes. "No, I'm afraid that if I stay too long, I will accidentally fall in love with someone, it will be difficult to deal with. Liking someone. How could she attack another person?" She was afraid that she would be schizophrenic, she could only escape from this possibility. The system was silent for a moment. "All right, activate the newbie gift pack." After Yi Yuxuan finished instructing, the old tailor said gently, "Young master, this girl is very good, you should cherish her." Yi Yuxuan looked at him coldly, "Don't say this kind of nonsense." The old tailor knew that he was always like this, he just smiled and lowered his head to continue drawing the design. However, Yi Yuxuan seemed to have sensed something. He immediately turned around and saw Wei Wei Bai leaning against the wooden wall behind the stool with her eyes closed. Her long hair was draped over her shoulders, and beside her was the drink from earlier. It was still smoking. Everything seemed so beautiful. She fell asleep again. Yi Yuxuan slowly walked in front of her, squatted down, and then reached out to hug her. "Do you dream when you're asleep?" he asked. However, he did not hear a reply. Yi Yuxuan continued softly, "You can sleep for as long as you're by my side." Wei Wei Bai woke up with a familiar headache. She hadn't finished digesting the transferred memories. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was the scene of a banquet. She held a bottle of champagne in her hand and wore a high-end light purple dress. Her long, curly, seaweed-like hair draped over her chest, and she wore a small crown with diamonds twined around it. There was only one word to describe it: expensive. In front of her stood 3 men. All of them were of the highest quality. Wei Wei Bai had just finished digesting the information in her mind. The system's notification immediately sounded. This mission is to obtain Su Mengui's love. Target, Su Mengui. Degree of completion, 0. Time, 4 months. Su Mengui. Wei Wei Bai saw a fox-eyed man in front of her. He looked especially popular with women and was nonchalantly throwing flirtatious glances at her. Then she saw the one in the middle. He was cold, cool, and handsome, but his eyes were affectionately looking at her. He was also a man a little girl would like. Then Wei Wei Bai's gaze finally moved to the third man. He had his head lowered the entire time, wearing a gentle smile. He was a bit older than the previous 2. His face was handsome, and his temperament leaned toward a scholarly air. He was Su Mengui. When he looked at Wei Wei Bai, there was amazement in his eyes. However, he restrained himself. He used a gaze that Wei Wei Bai could see, but also made people feel like he wasn't doing it on purpose. He naturally looked at her for a few seconds before looking away. Chapter 7:13. It seemed to be the shyness of a mature man, inadvertently stirring people's hearts. Wei Wei Bai was shocked when she saw him. This expression, this forbearing, natural, and seductive performance, even the drama queen had to give in. If she hadn't seen the system's favorability, she really thought that this Su Mengui had fallen in love with her at first sight. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at -25. -25 was the same as a favorability of 95. Wei Wei Bai immediately raised her spirits. The drama queen and drama queen's eyes shone brightly. "Wei Wei, which one do you like?" a middle-aged man next to her said. Wei Wei Bai turned her head and saw the father of the original owner of this body, by Qing Shui. His temples were a little gray, his face was still handsome, and there were crow's feet at the corners of his eyes, but he had the mature charm of a man. He looked at her with a doting expression. Her identity this time was the only daughter of the Bai family, the richest and most powerful family in N City. She was also a veritable little princess in N City. Tens of thousands of people doted on her, and wherever she went, she was the object of flattery. When the little princess's age came, Bai Qing Shui began to look for a son-in-law who could marry into the Bai family. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would be wronged, so he chose ambitious and handsome young men whose family backgrounds weren't as good as the Bai families. 3 men came this time. This was already the 6th batch. Once they married Wei Wei Bai, they would be the future successor of the Bai family group. Who wouldn't scramble like a flock of ducks? Bai Qing Shui only had one request, and that was to make his daughter like them. Whoever got Wei Wei Bai's favor could become the son-in-law. For a man, marrying into the family was a disgrace. But marrying into the Bai family was like winning the lottery. Bai Qing Shui clearly wanted to cultivate a successor and couldn't bear to see Wei Wei Bai suffer, so he set his sights on a son-in-law. To prevent the family property from flowing out, he set a hard condition for marrying into the family. So each one of them tried their best to curry favor with Wei Wei Bai. Su Mengue was one of the candidates who came to apply for the position of son-in-law. The data showed that Su Mengue had come to destroy the Bai family. Su Mengue was the illegitimate son of the Su family. His mother, Han Ling, liked Bai Qing Shui very much when she was young, but Bai Qing Shui only loved Wei Wei Bai's mother. Han Ling was unwilling and became the mistress of the Su family's head, giving birth to Su Mengue. Because she had become Bai Qing Shui's mistress, she had some power and began to use this power to get close to Bai Qing Shui. Bai Qing Shui was extremely loyal and loathed Han Ling. He even chased Han Ling out of the Bai family's banquet in front of everyone. Han Ling's love turned to hatred. She used the power in her hands to obtain information about a big business deal of the Bai family and then leaked it to others. This led to the failure of the business. She even planned to run over Bai Qing Shui with her car so that she could die with him. When Wei Wei Bai saw the information, she felt that Han Ling was the model of a typical evil female supporting character. Why was she always chasing after a man? Couldn't she be nicer to him? In the end, Han Ling did not succeed. Instead, she killed herself. And this thoroughly enraged Bai Qing Shui. At that time, Wei Wei Bai's pregnant mother was with him. If Han Ling had succeeded, not only would he have died, but his wife and child would also have died. He angrily suppressed the Su family. The Su family paid a huge price to quell Bai Qing Shui's anger. After such a big blow, the Su family was unable to recover from the setback and became a third-rate family. They also became the target of everyone's ridicule. And the Su family vented this sullenness, discomfort, and anger on Su Mengue. Who told this to be caused by his evil mother? Han Ling died. Someone had to stand up and atone for her sins. And Su Mengue was the target of bullying. From childhood to adulthood, men and women, old and young, abused and oppressed him. Not exploding in silence. Just being perverted in silence. /to txt. Download, comma. Chapter 7:14. Su Mengue didn't explode. He was perverted. He was like a vicious and cold viper in the night, not fighting back when hit, not retorting when scolded. He endured and lay dormant. Then, when his strength was slowly accumulated, he began to take revenge. He spent 3 years making his half-brothers kill each other. He made sure that none of his vicious sisters had a good end. Then, he personally poisoned his own father. Then he regained control of the Su family, relying on his excellent talent for business and his vicious and unscrupulous character. He thoroughly stood firm in the business circle. He emptied the Su family and used it on his new company. The company was mysterious and powerful, but no one knew that he was the CEO. The information obtained from the outside world was that the Su family was on the verge of collapse. In the eyes of others, Su Mengue was a good young man who made progress. He was average in all aspects, but not outstanding. And his family background wasn't good. Many people were surprised that he could come to the Bai family's banquet as a candidate for a son-in-law. Many people knew about Han Ling's matter. So more people felt that Bai Qingshui called him as a candidate to insult him. Bai Qingshui didn't think so much. He'd offended many people who'd offended him. The matter of so many years ago was nothing more than a crazy woman's revenge. It wasn't worth mentioning in his eyes. His precious daughter was the most important. There were so many candidates. Most of the young talents in N City had come. This would raise his daughter's reputation to the next level. That was the most important thing. But Su Mengue came with a purpose. He'd already killed a bunch of people who'd bullied him. His strength was enough. So he set the target of his revenge on Bai Qingshui. If he hadn't abandoned his mother back then, his childhood wouldn't have been so miserable. Bai Qingshui loved Wei Wei Bai the most. He came to make Wei Wei Bai's life worse than death, so as to achieve his revenge on Bai Qingshui and destroy the Bai family. Bai Qingshui asked gently, "Wei Wei, if you don't like anyone, just send them away. You can continue to choose for next week's banquet." Wei Wei Bai looked at so much melodramatic information, and her expression was a little sluggish. She immediately came back to her senses and said sweetly, "Dad, how about I play a game? I'll choose whoever passes." Bai Qingshui frowned. "How can you be so childish?" Wei Wei Bai, who maintained her little princess persona, naturally shook his arm. "I've long been sick of these dating shows. Anyway, they're all the same. Anyone will do." Bai Qingshui said helplessly, "Nonsense." Wei Wei Bai smiled happily and cutely. "I'm just messing around." With that, Wei Wei Bai stood up. Her long skirt swayed along with her beautiful steps. Under the bright lights, her smile was so pure and sweet that it moved people. Su Mengue saw her walking towards him. His smile was restrained, carrying traces of expectation. But Wei Wei Bai turned a blind eye and walked past him. Her eyes didn't linger on him for half a second. Su Mengue's expression didn't change, but a trace of imperceptible darkness flashed through his eyes. Wei Wei Bai threw the little crown on her head into the deep water of the nearby swimming pool. Then she turned back and pointed to the little crown in the swimming pool. "Whoever grabs it will be my boyfriend." The other two candidates immediately jumped into the water. Only Su Mengue stood in place, smiling gently. His eyes were so peaceful that it was pleasing. Wei Wei Bai glanced at the two men fighting for supremacy in the swimming pool, and a trace of disgust flashed through her eyes. She suddenly thought of something and looked back at Su Mengue curiously. "Hey, why aren't you going down to grab it?" Su Mengue seemed to think he wouldn't be noticed. His smile stiffened, and his face turned red when he saw her. Then he lowered his head and smiled. "Because I feel that something that has been thrown away isn't worthy of returning to your side." With that, Su Mengue reached into the flower arch next to him, plucked some roses, and weaved them into a garland. He carefully placed the garland on Wei Wei Bai's hair. Slash. Slash. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the button at the bottom to record your reading record. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.